He opened the door, looked her up and down once, and said it without a flicker of hesitation or apology. "You need to leave. I never sent for a bride." Clara Whitmore had ridden 3 days across Wyoming in December for this moment. One worn coat, one small bag, one letter promising a new life. And the man holding the door was already turning his back on her before she'd said a single word. No explanation, no apology, just 4 words and a closing door. She didn't beg. She didn't cry. She simply stood in the snow and made a decision he never saw coming. And that decision would change everything about the life he thought he'd already figured out. If this story stopped you, hit like and drop the name of your city or country in the comments. I want to see how far this has traveled. Subscribe so you never miss what comes next. Because the best part hasn't started yet. The letter had come through a matchmaking agency out of Cheyenne, a respectable enough outfit, or so Clara had been told by the woman at the boarding house in Laramie, who'd handed it to her with a knowing look. The letter said a rancher in the Powder River country needed a capable woman. It listed practical things: cooking, household management, a willingness to endure hard winters. It did not mention love. Clara hadn't expected love. She'd expected a roof and a purpose, which was more than she had. What she had not expected was a man who looked at her the way Elias Voss was looking at her now. Not with cruelty exactly, but with something colder than cruelty. Dismissal. The particular brand of dismissal that doesn't even bother to be angry because the person being dismissed isn't worth the effort of anger. "I have the letter," Claire said. She reached into her coat and pulled out a folded envelope, the paper soft from handling. "It came through the Cheyenne agency. It has your name on it." Elias stepped back out onto the porch. He took the letter, read it, and his expression didn't change. He folded it back along its creases and held it out to her. "That's not my handwriting," he said. "And it's not my name at the bottom." Clara looked. She'd read that signature 100 times on the 3-day journey. E. Voss, Blackthorn Ranch, Powder River. She looked up at him. "It says Voss." "My brother's name is also Voss," Elias said. "Edmund Voss. He sold this property to me 2 years ago and apparently didn't bother to tell whoever he'd written to." He paused. "Or he did this on purpose. Either way, it's not my arrangement." A gust of wind cut across the porch, and Clara felt it go straight through her coat, which had been inadequate for this weather since the 2nd day of the journey. She did not shiver. She refused to shiver in front of this man. "Where's your brother?" she asked. "Denver, last I heard." "And the agency?" 3 days south in Cheyenne." He said it without apology. Simply the arithmetic of her situation laid out like figures in a ledger. "Look, I'll give you what supplies you need. There's a stage that comes through Orrin twice a week. You can—" "There is no stage," Clara said. "The driver told me when he dropped me. The pass is closed. There won't be another coach through until the thaw, which he said could be 6 weeks. Elias looked at her for the first time with something other than dismissal. Not warmth, more like a man recalculating a problem he thought was simple. He looked past her at the sky. The clouds were the color of a bruise spreading across the north, the kind that didn't ask permission before dropping 3 feet of snow on everything beneath them. He'd spent enough winters on this land to know what that sky meant. "You'll stay in the barn tonight," he said finally. "I won't stay in a barn." The words came out of her before she'd even decided to say them. Elias Voss looked back at her, and for the first time something flickered behind his eyes. Not quite surprise. More like the expression of a man who'd expected a door to give way and felt the resistance of solid wood instead. "It's warm," he said. "The animals—" "I am not an animal," Clara said. "I've slept in worse places than a barn, Mr. Voss, but I won't be put in one like livestock because your brother made a clerical error and you find me inconvenient. I'll sleep on the porch before I sleep in the barn." From inside the house came the sound of small feet on floorboards. Elias turned his head slightly, a reflex, and Clara used that half-second to look past him into the house. She caught a glimpse of 2 children, a girl who looked about 9, standing in the hallway with wide dark eyes, and behind her the partial silhouette of a boy, older, hanging back in the shadow of the doorframe. Elias turned back to her. There's a storage cabin, he said, south side of the property. It's not comfortable, but it's solid and the stove works. That'll do, Clara said. She picked up her bag. Elias looked at it. The single small bag, the worn coat, the boots that were already darkening with moisture, and then he looked away because looking at it meant acknowledging something he didn't want to acknowledge. He stepped off the porch and said without looking back, "Follow me." The cabin was small enough that she could cross it in 4 steps. There was a single cot against the wall, a pot-bellied stove with a cracked firebox door that someone had patched with wire, 2 wooden crates, and a window with oilskin tacked over it where glass should have been. Clara stood in the middle of it and looked around with the careful, inventory-taking look of a woman who has learned that sentiment is a luxury. Elias set a lantern on the crate nearest the stove. He'd brought wood in a canvas sling, and he stacked it by the door without comment. He'd also brought a tin of matches, a wool blanket that smelled of cedar, and a plate covered with a cloth that turned out to hold cold biscuits and a piece of salt pork. He was doing this efficiently, completing a task. "The stove draws to the left," he said, crouching to demonstrate. "You have to angle the wood, or it catches wrong and smokes." Clara watched him build the fire. His hands were not gentle hands. They were rancher's hands, knuckled and scarred, the kind that had been broken and healed imperfectly more than once. He worked without wasted motion. "I'll leave it first light," Claire said. He stood up. The fire was catching, throwing orange light across the space between them. "Where will you go?" he asked. It wasn't unkind. It was the same directness as before, just the arithmetic. "I'll figure that out," she said. "It's not your concern." Elias looked at her for a long moment. In the firelight, she could see what she hadn't been able to see clearly on the porch, that he was younger than she'd first thought, probably not yet 40, but with the kind of face that had been aged by something other than years. His eyes were the particular shade of gray that absorbs light rather than reflecting it. "It's 8 miles to the nearest neighbor," he said. "In this weather, on foot?" I understood the distance when I said, "I'll figure it out." He picked up the lantern he'd brought and held out a second one, smaller, a barn lantern she hadn't noticed him carrying. "Keep this burning. The temperature's going to drop hard tonight." Clara took the lantern. Their hands didn't touch. He left without another word, pulling the cabin door shut behind him. Clara stood alone in the small light of the stove and listened to his boots crunch away across the frozen ground. She sat down on the cot. She put her bag on her lap. She did not cry, because crying was something she'd trained herself out of years ago, the way you train yourself out of reaching for a stove lid without a cloth. You do it once, it costs you, and you don't do it again. She ate the cold biscuits and the salt pork and stared at the fire through the cracked door of the stove, and she let herself think, clearly and without drama, about what she actually had. She had enough money for perhaps a week of room and board somewhere, if she could get somewhere. She had the skills to keep a household. She'd been keeping other people's households since she was 14. She had the letter from the agency, which was worthless as a legal document, but might be useful as evidence of the mistake. She had her coat, which was not good enough for Wyoming in December. She had herself, which had always been the thing she was least sure was enough. Inside the main house, Elias stood at the kitchen window and watched the faint glow of the storage cabin through the darkness. The children were behind him at the table. "Is she going to sleep out there all night?" his daughter Nora asked. Nora was 9 and had inherited her mother's habit of asking questions that had obvious answers, as if asking them might somehow change those answers. "Yes," Elias said. "It's cold. The stove works." Pa. That was his son, Thomas, 14, and lately his voice had developed an edge to it that Elias recognized as the beginning of a person forming real opinions and being willing to say them. "She came a long way." "She came to the wrong place," Elias said. He didn't turn from the window. "Edmund sent that letter. That's Edmund's mess." "Edmund's in Denver," Thomas said. "I know where Edmund is." Nora slid off her chair and came to stand beside him at the window. She was small enough that she had to go up on her toes to see over the sill. She looked at the distant orange glow for a moment. "She didn't cry," Nora said. Elias looked down at his daughter. "What?" When you told her she had to leave, she didn't cry or beg or anything. Nora considered. She just stood there like she was deciding something. Elias looked back at the window. Go to bed, he said. But Pa, bed, Nora. She went. Thomas followed, though he gave his father a look on the way out that Elias chose not to acknowledge. When they were gone, Elias poured himself a cup of coffee from the pot on the stove and stood at the window for a long time, watching the light in the cabin, which did not go out. He thought about the letter. He'd recognized Edmund's handwriting immediately, the two careful loops of a man who'd been told his handwriting was poor and had overcompensated ever since. Edmund had written that letter. Edmund had sent a woman 3 days across Wyoming in December to a ranch Edmund didn't even own anymore. And then Edmund was in Denver, warm and unbothered, and nowhere near the consequences of his own arrangements. That was very much like Edmund. Elias thought about what he'd seen on the porch, the single bag, the coat, the particular stillness of a woman who had arrived at the end of something and was quietly taking stock. He thought about what Nora had said. She didn't cry. He finished his coffee. He went to bed. He lay in the dark for a long time, staring at the ceiling of the room he'd shared for 6 years with his wife Ruth, and that he'd slept alone in for the 2 years since her death. And he waited for sleep, which had been unreliable since Ruth died, and did not come any more reliably now. Clara was awake before the sky lightened. She'd slept in pieces, an hour here, 40 minutes there, which was how she usually slept in strange places, which was most places. She built the fire back up, heated water in the single tin cup the cabin had to offer, and drank it plain because there was nothing to put in it, which was fine. She'd had plain hot water for breakfast before. She'd decided, somewhere around 3 in the morning, that walking 8 miles in December on an empty stomach was inadvisable, but not impossible. She'd done comparable things. She would be at the neighboring property before noon if she moved steadily, and from there she could figure out the next step. She was rolling her blanket to put it back on the cot when the cabin door opened. She turned, expecting Elias. It was not Elias. Nora stood in the doorway wearing a coat that was too big for her, probably a hand-me-down from Thomas, holding a covered plate in both hands. Her dark hair was in a braid that someone had done imperfectly, one side looser than the other, the kind of braid a girl does herself when there's no one to do it for her. Pa doesn't know I'm here, Nora said. This was offered not as a warning, but as information, stated with the particular practicality of a child who has learned to navigate around adult complications. I brought you breakfast. Clara looked at the plate, looked at the girl. Come in, she said. You're letting the heat out. Nora came in and set the plate on the crate nearest the stove. She lifted the cloth, 2 eggs, a thick slice of bread with butter, and a piece of ham. Real breakfast. She'd raided the kitchen deliberately and efficiently. You didn't have to do that, Clara said. I know. Nora looked around the cabin with frank appraisal. It's cold in here. It's warmer than it was. The stove does what it can. Nora looked at Clara's coat hanging on the single nail by the door. That coat isn't good enough, she said. I know that too. We have an extra. It was Ma's. Pa put it in the chest in the hall. Nora said this carefully, testing it the way you test ice, on 1 foot, then more weight. He hasn't opened that chest in a long time. I don't think he'd notice. Clara sat down on the cot and looked at this child. This small, practical, slightly heartbreaking child who had gotten up before her father to bring breakfast to a stranger and was now matter-of-factly proposing to take her dead mother's coat from a locked chest to give to that stranger. Tell me about your mother, Clara said. Nora sat down on the other crate. She thought about it the way children think when they've been asked something real instead of something easy. She smelled like pine resin and bread, Nora said. She was funny, but she didn't always mean to be. She could rope as well as Pa, but he never liked to say so. A pause. She died in February 2 years ago. Fever. It went through the whole valley that winter. I'm sorry, Clara said. Nora shrugged with one shoulder. The particular shrug of a child who has heard those words many times and has come to understand that they are true and also insufficient. Pa tried to keep the ranch going by himself. He's doing it, but She stopped. But, Clara said. He forgot how to talk, Nora said. He used to tell us stories at night. After she died, the stories stopped. She looked at Clara directly. Thomas says Pa wrote to Edmund about needing help. Not a bride, just help. Thomas says Edmund probably got confused, or he did it on purpose, Clara said quietly. Nora met her eyes. Maybe, she said. Edmund is not our favorite uncle. Clara almost smiled. She caught it before it fully formed, but she felt it. A small, involuntary warmth somewhere in her chest. She ate the breakfast that Nora had brought her. Nora sat on the crate and they talked about small things. The ranch, the 2 horses that Clara had seen in the small corral near the main barn, whether the creek that ran along the eastern edge of the property ever froze solid enough to walk on. Nora was the kind of child who asks better questions than most adults and pays full attention to the answers, and Clara found herself talking with her the way she hadn't talked with anyone in longer than she could exactly remember. When the plate was clean, Nora picked it up to take it back. She paused at the door. If you decide to stay, she said, I could show you where everything is. I'm not staying, Clara said. Nora nodded. She opened the door and then stopped again, not turning around. She didn't want to be replaced, she said. Pa, I mean, he doesn't want someone to replace her, but that's not... I don't think that's what you're for. She said it to the open doorway, to the cold morning air. I think maybe you're for something else. She left before Clara could answer. Clara was standing in front of the cabin, her bag packed, her coat buttoned to the throat, when Elias came out of the main house at 7 o'clock. He stopped when he saw her. His breath made a cloud in the air. You're actually leaving, he said. You actually told me to. He looked at the sky. The storm clouds from the night before hadn't moved. They'd settled, heavy and low, the kind that sit on a landscape the way a lid sits on a pot. The temperature had dropped another 10 degrees overnight. It's worse than yesterday, he said. I noticed. The Callaway place is 8 miles. The Hendersons are 12, but the trail's better. He was looking at the clouds, not at her. Either way, in this cold, carrying that bag, I'll walk fast, Clara said. You'll die, Elias said. He said it bluntly, not to frighten her, just as the arithmetic, which was somehow worse than if he'd said it cruelly. Not immediately. 3-4 hours out, you'll start to feel warm, which means you're actually freezing, and by the time you realize it, you won't be able to do anything about it. I've lost 2 calves and a dog that way in the last 2 winters, and they had 4 legs each. Clara looked at him. So what are you suggesting? He was quiet for a moment. She could see him working through something. The way a man works through something he's already decided but hasn't yet reconciled himself to. Stay, he said. It's not what Edmund arranged. It's not anything like that. But you can stay through the worst of the winter, and when the pass opens, I'll drive you to Cheyenne myself, and you can go wherever you're going. He paused. In exchange for work, Clara said. He looked at her. I don't take charity, she said. If I stay, I work. Whatever the ranch needs that I can do. You tell me what that is, and I'll tell you if I can do it, and we'll settle on fair terms. She held his gaze. I'm not a guest, Mr. Voss. I'm not a burden. And I'm not a bride. I'm a person who can be useful to you and would like reasonable conditions in exchange for that usefulness. Can we do that or can't we? Elias looked at her for a long time. Behind him, through the kitchen window, Clara could see the blurred shape of Nora watching them. The children's clothes need mending, he said finally. I can't sew worth a damn, and I've been putting it off since September. Nora needs someone to practice her reading with. She's better than Thomas was at her age, but she doesn't get enough practice. There are accounts that need going over, the records for the past year, costs, and income. I can't make them come right, and I think there's an error somewhere. He stopped. And the cooking, I can manage, but I'm not... He stopped again. Good at it? Clara offered. No. I can cook, she said. I can do the accounts. I kept books for a hardware store in Laramie for 2 years. I can sew. I can do the reading with Nora. She paused. What's the arrangement for the cabin? You can stay in it. I'll bring you wood. I'll get my own wood, she said. He almost said something. She could see the reflex of objection in his jaw. And then he let it go. All right, he said. All right, she said. They stood in the freezing air for a moment. These two people who had somehow stumbled into an arrangement neither of them had chosen or entirely understood. And then Elias turned back toward the main house, and Clara set her bag down in front of the cabin door and started looking for the woodpile. Thomas found her there an hour later, splitting kindling with an axe she'd found leaning against the cabin wall. He stood and watched her for a moment. She was efficient, if not practiced, splitting the smaller pieces cleanly, even if she was slightly off on the larger ones. "You're still here," he said. "I am," Clara said. She didn't stop working. Thomas was quiet for a moment. He was taller than she'd realized, and he had his father's jaw and his mother's eyes, which she could tell because they were the same shape as Nora's, and neither of them looked much like Elias. "Pa said you're going to go over the accounts," Thomas said. "That's right." "He's been fighting with those numbers for 3 months." Thomas said it with the particular admiration of a teenager for a task he recognizes as difficult that he's relieved someone else has taken on. Uncle Edmund handled them before he sold to Pa. When Pa took over, the records were, he searched for the word. "A mess?" Claire suggested. "I was going to say complicated." "I've seen complicated accounts before," Claire said. "Usually they're complicated for a reason. Sometimes the reason is poor organization. Sometimes the reason is that someone was helping themselves to money that wasn't theirs." She said it matter-of-factly, still splitting wood. "Either way, the numbers tell you what happened if you know how to ask them." Thomas looked at her. "Uncle Edmund handled the money until 2 years ago," he said. Clara set another piece of wood on the block. "Is that right?" she said, not as a question. Thomas was quiet for a moment, then, "Pa doesn't like to think it. About Edmund." "People usually don't like to think the worst about their family," Clara said. "Did you have family?" Thomas asked, then caught himself. She could see it, the social reflex of a teenager realizing he'd asked something too directly. "Sorry, No, it's fine," Clara said. "I had a mother. She died when I was 12. I had a father who decided that a 12-year-old girl could figure out the rest on her own." She swung the axe. "So I did." Thomas absorbed this. "And then you ended up here." "And then I ended up here," Clara agreed. He was quiet for another beat. Then he bent down and started stacking the wood she'd split into a neat pile against the cabin wall, without being asked, without comment. Clara noticed this and didn't say anything about it, because sometimes the best thing you can do with a gesture like that is simply accept it. They worked together for a while in the cold morning air, the thud of the axe and the click of stacked wood the only sounds between them, and the storm clouds above moved not at all. She started with the accounts that afternoon. Elias brought them to the cabin himself, 3 ledger books and a wooden box stuffed with receipts and invoices and papers of various sizes, in no particular order. He set them on the crate that was serving as her table and looked at the disarray himself with what might have been embarrassment. "Edmund always said he had a system," Elias said. "I'm sure he did," Clara said. She lifted one of the invoices and looked at it, studied the figures, set it down and picked up another. "Do you want me to explain?" "Not yet," she said. "Let me look first." He left. She worked for 4 hours without stopping, by lantern light as the short winter afternoon faded to dark. She sorted, and she read, and she cross-referenced, and she made notes in a small notebook she'd brought in her bag. And by the time she heard the dinner bell from the main house, a real bell, hung by the back door, which Nora rang with evident enthusiasm, she had found 3 things. The first was that Edmund's system was not, in fact, a system. It was chaos with pretensions. The second was that there was a clear gap of several months, about 18 months before Edmund had sold the property to Elias, during which income that should have been recorded was not. The gap was not large enough to be impossible to miss. It was exactly large enough to be easy to explain away. The third thing was a folded piece of paper tucked into the back cover of the oldest ledger, which appeared to be a letter. She unfolded it. It was addressed to someone named Harriet Voss at an address in Colorado, dated 4 years ago, and it was from Edmund. She read the first paragraph and then stopped reading, because some things you don't go into fully until you understand what you're looking at. She folded it back up and put it in her coat pocket. Then she went to the main house for dinner. The kitchen was warm in a way that the cabin was not. The range put out real heat, and there were smells of actual cooking, which turned out to be a stew that Nora had started under Thomas's uncertain supervision that was better than it had any right to be given the uncertainty. Elias was at the table already, looking at nothing in particular, his hands flat on the tabletop the way hands go flat when a man is too tired to hold them up but too awake to put them down. Nora ladled stew into bowls with great ceremony. Thomas cut bread. Clara sat in the empty chair and felt, with a peculiarity she did not examine too closely, the strangeness of sitting at a table with other people for the first time in longer than she could count. "How were the accounts?" Elias asked. "Complicated," Clara said. "I'll need a few more days to sort through everything properly." He nodded. "I have questions," she said. "But they can wait." He looked at her then. A brief, sharp look. He'd caught something in her phrasing. She watched him decide to let it go. "Fine," he said. They ate. Nora talked about the crow that had been trying to get into the grain store, about the chapter she'd read in her school book, about whether the creek was frozen yet. Thomas offered opinions when asked and stayed quiet otherwise. Elias ate and listened and occasionally said one-word things in response to Nora's questions. Clara noticed the space at the table. Not an empty chair. There wasn't one. Not obviously. Just a kind of space in the shape of things, in the way the conversation moved around certain silences, in the way Elias sometimes looked at a point between the children and then looked away. After dinner, Nora cleared the plates and Thomas brought in more wood for the kitchen stove, and Elias stood at the window with a coffee cup. "The storm's going to hit tonight," he said. Clara looked out the window. The dark was complete, and the wind had picked up enough to make the lamp flame tremble. "Big?" she asked. "Big enough." He turned from the window. "You should stay in the main house. The cabin. The stovepipe on that building isn't new. In a serious blow—" "I'll be fine in the cabin," Clara said. "Ms. Whitmore." His voice was flat and tired and slightly more direct than it had been all day. "I'm not offering you hospitality. I'm telling you that cabin has a flawed stovepipe, and if a serious storm hits tonight and that pipe has any trouble, you will be asphyxiated before you wake up, and I am not willing to find that out in the morning. There's a room upstairs. It was the sewing room. It has a bed and a window. That's all." Clara considered this. "All right," she said. Nora, who had been very carefully pretending not to listen from the sink, turned around with an expression of complete satisfaction that she did not even attempt to hide. Elias caught it. He pointed at his daughter. "Don't," he said. "I didn't say anything," Nora said. "You were about to." "I really wasn't." Elias looked at the ceiling. He picked up his coffee cup and went upstairs, and Nora waited until his footsteps had crossed the floor above them before she turned to Clara with enormous eyes and said, very quietly, "He never lets anyone in the sewing room." Clara looked at the stairs. "It was your mother's room?" she asked. "She sewed in there," Nora said, "and read. She liked the window." A pause. "He's been using it to store fence hardware for the last 8 months because he said he needed the space." She stopped. "There's not actually that much fence hardware in there. Thomas and I moved it to the barn last month. Pa hasn't noticed." Clara looked at the child. The small, practical, slightly heartbreaking child. "You planned this," Clara said. Nora's expression was perfectly guileless. "I'm 9, she said. "I can't plan things." "You absolutely can," Clara said. Nora considered this and then smiled, small and private and very much her own. "The sheets are clean," she said. "I did them last week, just in case." Clara picked up her bag from by the door and started toward the stairs. She paused at the bottom step. "Just in case of what?" she asked. Nora was already turning back to the dishes. "Just in case someone needed the room," she said simply. Clara went upstairs. She found the room, second door on the left, as Nora had said earlier without being asked. She opened the door. It was small, and it smelled faintly of cedar and something else, very faint, that might have been lavender or might have just been the memory of lavender. The window faced north, and the wind was pressing against it, making the old glass flex and breathe. The sheets were, in fact, clean. Clara set her bag down. She sat on the edge of the bed. She listened to the wind pick up and the house settle against it, the way old houses settle, not with alarm, just with a long, slow adjustment to the pressure of the world outside. She thought about the letter in her coat pocket. She thought about Edmund Voss in Denver, warm and unbothered. She thought about 3 months of missing income and a gap in the records that was exactly the size of something a man might think he could get away with. She thought about a woman who had died of a fever in February and left behind a husband who had forgotten how to tell stories at night and a daughter who changed the sheets in the sewing room just in case. She lay down on the clean sheets without undressing, because she had learned long ago not to be too comfortable in a place until she understood it, and she listened to the storm arrive. It came the way she'd expected, not in a single dramatic blow but in increments, testing the seams of things first, finding the weak points, and then pressing. The windows shook. Somewhere below a shutter banged twice and then was silent. The house groaned once, a deep structural sound, and then settled. Upstairs, in the dark, Clara Whitmore listened to Wyoming try to shake a house that had been standing for 18 years, and felt something she hadn't felt in so long she almost didn't recognize it. She felt, despite everything, like she might be in the right place. She didn't trust that feeling. She had learned over the years not to trust feelings that arrived without evidence. But she acknowledged it the way you acknowledge something in the dark, not reaching for it, just knowing it's there. The storm pressed on. The house held. Clara slept. She was already awake when the storm broke, not because the wind stopped. It didn't stop, not entirely. It tapered the way hard things taper, gradually and without announcement. Clara lay in the narrow bed in the sewing room and listened to the silence fill in where the noise had been. And then she got up. The window showed a world remade. The snow had come in sideways and was packed against the north-facing glass in a thick crust, and what she could see through the clear bottom quarter of the pane was a yard so white and seamless it looked like something that had never been walked on. The corral fence was a suggestion. The storage cabin was a white shape. She dressed quickly, splashed water from the basin on the windowsill. Ice had formed at the edges overnight, and went downstairs. The kitchen was empty, but the stove was lit. Someone had been up before her. There was coffee in the pot, still hot enough, and she poured a cup and stood at the kitchen window and drank it and looked at the snow. She heard boots on the porch. The back door opened and Elias came in sideways, knocking snow off his coat, and he stopped when he saw her standing in his kitchen with a coffee cup like she'd been doing it for years. They looked at each other. "Storm passed," he said. "I heard. 4 feet in the north field, less here, maybe 2.5. He hung his coat on the peg by the door and moved to the stove to warm his hands over it. His knuckles were red from the cold. The cattle came through. Lost one fence section on the east side. "What about the cabin stovepipe?" she asked. He looked at her. "What?" "You said last night the pipe wasn't new. In a serious blow. Your words." A pause. "It came loose at the joint," he said. "About 6 inches. If you'd been in there with the stove running..." "I would have been asphyxiated," Clara said. "Like you said." He didn't answer that because it didn't require an answer. He just looked at the stove. "Thank you," Clara said. "For the room." He moved to the coffee pot. "Don't thank me. Nora would have moved into that cabin herself to keep you company, and then I'd have 2 problems. Clara set down her cup. She reached into the pocket of her dress. She'd transferred it there from her coat in the night, and pulled out the folded letter. She set it on the table between them. Elias looked at it. He didn't touch it. "Found it in the back of the oldest ledger," Clara said. "I don't know if you've seen it before. It's addressed to a Harriet Voss, Colorado address." Something changed in his face. Not much. Like a shadow crossing a field, fast and then gone. "Harriet is Edmund's wife," he said. "I didn't read past the first paragraph," Clara said. "But what I read, I think you need to see it." He picked it up. She turned away and looked out the window to give him whatever privacy the small kitchen allowed. She listened to the paper unfold, and then there was a long silence. When she turned back, He was still holding the letter, but he wasn't reading it anymore. He was looking at a point somewhere past it, somewhere past the wall behind her. He borrowed against the ranch, Elias said. It wasn't quite a question. That's what it looks like from the accounts, Claire said. The gap I found, the 18 months of missing income, I think he was servicing a debt he'd taken against the property. A debt he hadn't told anyone about. When he sold you the ranch, that debt should have been settled in the terms of sale. She paused. Was it? Elias set the letter down flat on the table. He put both hands on it like he was pressing it into the wood. He told me the ranch was clear, no liens, no encumbrances. I paid him what he asked, and I have the deed. I'd want to look at the deed, Clara said. I'll get it, he said. His voice was very level in the way that voices go when a person is working very hard at level. He left the kitchen. Clara heard him on the stairs, then overhead, then back down. He came in with a large envelope and put it on the table next to the letter. Clara spread the deed. She read it slowly. She read the relevant paragraphs twice. There's language here, she said, about existing agreements. It's tucked into the middle section. Most people would read past it. She pointed. This phrase, subject to prior instruments of record, that's legal language for debts or claims already registered against the property. It's a standard phrase, but combined with what I found in the accounts, she stopped. He sold me a property with a lien against it, Elias said. Possibly. I'm not a lawyer, but if I'm reading this right, and I think I am, then whoever Edmund borrowed from may still have a claim. She folded the deed back carefully. Do you know the name Aldous Creel? Elias went very still. Where did you see that name? The letter, first paragraph. He's writing to his wife about a meeting with someone named Creel. She looked at Elias. You know him. Everyone in this part of the territory knows who Aldous Creel is, Elias said. He's a land broker out of Cheyenne. He buys up failed properties, leases grazing rights, funds loans against ranch land. He's been operating in the Powder River country for 10 years. A pause. He's not someone you want to owe money to. Clara absorbed this. She looked at the letter, still open on the table. How much did you pay Edmund for the ranch? Elias told her. She did the mental arithmetic. And the gap in the accounts, the income Edmund didn't record, over 18 months it amounts to approximately. She'd done this calculation 4 times the previous afternoon, from 4 different angles to make sure she had it right. About 40% of what you paid him. Elias looked at the ceiling. A single muscle moved in his jaw. He skimmed the income to service the debt, Elias said, and then sold me the ranch without clearing it, pocketed my money, and went to Denver. That's what the numbers suggest, Clara said. From upstairs came the sound of small feet hitting the floor. Both of them looked at the ceiling simultaneously, and the shared gesture, the simultaneous parental reflex, made Clara look away. Don't say anything in front of the children, Elias said. Of course not. He picked up the letter and folded it back the way it had been. He looked at it in his hand. I need to think about this, he said. Take your time, Clara said. The records aren't going anywhere. She picked up her coffee cup, which had gone cold. I'll start on the mending this morning if Nora can show me where you keep the sewing things. He looked at her. The look was brief and complicated, and he didn't put words to it. They're in the cedar chest in the hallway, he said. Left side when you open it. Nora appeared in the kitchen 17 minutes later, wearing her boots on the wrong feet, which she corrected without acknowledgement when Clara pointed it down the wrong side of the hall. Thomas appeared 10 minutes after that, ate a bowl of porridge in 4 minutes standing at the counter, and went out to help his father with the fence section. Clara spent the morning at the kitchen table with the sewing basket and a pile of the children's clothes that she'd been shown in the hall closet. She worked steadily, quietly, the way she'd always worked. Not fast exactly, but without wasted motion. Nora sat across from her and did her reading lesson, which consisted of Nora reading aloud from a school book and Clara listening and occasionally asking a question that made Nora stop and think about what she'd just read, rather than just hearing the words. You're different from the teacher at the Valley School, Nora said about an hour in. Different how? She asks if we read the words right. You ask if we understood them. Nora considered this. It's harder. Most useful things are, Clara said. She bit a thread. Keep going. Nora kept going. She was, as Elias had said, a good reader, better than her age suggested, with the kind of comprehension that comes from a child who actually thinks while she reads, rather than just decoding sounds. She read a passage about rivers and then looked up. "The Powder River," she said. "Is that why we're called the Powder River Country?" "Go look it up and tell me what you find." Nora scrambled off the chair and went to the shelf where the ranch's small collection of books lived, and began pulling them out one by one, looking for something with maps or geography. Clara watched her from the corner of her eye and went back to the mending. She was working on Thomas's winter coat. The lining had separated at the shoulder seam, which was the kind of thing that starts small and becomes a real problem in serious cold, when she heard the back door open and Thomas came in alone, stomping snow off his boots. Clara looked up. "Where's your father?" "He rode out," Thomas said. He sounded strange, controlled in a way that indicated the control was costing him something. "Rode out where?" Thomas came to the table. He sat down across from her in the chair Nora had vacated. He looked at his hands on the tabletop. "He said he was going to the Hendersons," Thomas said. "Bill Henderson is a lawyer, was a lawyer. He doesn't practice anymore, but He stopped. "He wouldn't tell me why. He just said to finish the fence line and he'd be back by dark." Nora had frozen by the bookshelf, one book half pulled out, listening. "Your father has business to sort out," Claire said. She kept her voice even. "Boring, grown-up business that has nothing to do with anything dangerous. He'll be back by dark." Thomas looked at her. He was 14 and not a fool. "Is it about Uncle Edmund?" "That's your father's to tell you," Claire said. "Not mine." "But you know." "Thomas," she looked at him directly, "your father will be back by dark and he'll tell you what you need to know when he decides you need to know it. That's how it should work." Thomas held her gaze for a moment. Then he got up, poured himself a glass of water from the pitcher on the counter, and drank it standing up. "I never liked Uncle Edmund," he said. "I've gathered," Claire said. Thomas set the glass down. He looked out the window toward the white field where the fence line ran. "Is Pa going to lose the ranch?" The question sat in the kitchen like a stone dropped in water. Nora had gone completely still by the bookshelf. Clara set down the coat she was mending. She looked at Thomas. "I don't know," she said. "I'm not going to tell you it's fine when I don't know that it is. What I can tell you is that the problem was there before I found it, and finding it is better than not finding it. You can't fix what you don't know is broken." Thomas looked at her for a long moment. He nodded once, short and tight, the way his father nodded. "Okay," he said. He picked up his gloves from the counter where he'd left them. "I'm going to finish the fence." He went back out. After a moment, Nora put the book back on the shelf and came to the table and sat down and picked up her school book and opened it without saying a word. Clara picked up the coat. They worked in silence for a while, and the silence was not uncomfortable. Chim. Elias came back at 4:30 just as the light was going gray. Clara heard his horse in the yard and watched from the kitchen window as he unsaddled the animal in the corral with movements that were harder and more deliberate than his usual efficiency. When he came inside, she could see it in his face. Not defeat exactly, but the particular set of a man who has received information he suspected but still hoped wasn't true. She sent the children upstairs with the pretense of needing the table for sorting the mended clothes, which was thin enough that Thomas saw through it immediately, but he took Nora up anyway without being asked twice. Elias sat down heavily at the table. Claire put coffee in front of him. He wrapped his hands around the cup and stared into it. "Bill Henderson confirms it," he said. "The lien is real. Creel registered it against the property 4 years ago. Edmund borrowed against the grazing rights on the east section. The deed I hold is... Bill says it's not invalid, but it's encumbered. If Creel decides to press the claim..." "What does Bill think Creel wants?" Clara asked. Elias let out a long breath. "The east section. 40 acres of the best grazing on this spread. Creel's been consolidating grazing land up and down this valley for years. The east section would connect 2 parcels he already holds." He set the coffee cup down with more force than he intended. "Edmund knew. He knew exactly what he was doing. He took Creel's money, couldn't pay it back, and sold me the problem instead of settling it." "How much does Edmund owe Creel?" "$420, Elias said. "Bill has the original instrument." Clara did not say what she was thinking about Edmund Voss, because it wasn't useful right now to say it. Can you pay it? Not without selling cattle I was planning to keep through spring, Elias said. And if I sell now in December in this market, I'll get 60 cents on the dollar at best. He rubbed the back of his neck. Maybe less. What if you challenge the lien, Clara said. If Edmund misrepresented the property in the sale, and he did, the deed language was deliberately obscure, there may be grounds to pursue Edmund for the debt. You could argue that clearing the lien is his responsibility, not yours. Edmund's in Denver. Edmund's in Denver now, Clara said. Courts can reach Denver. It would take time. How much time? Elias said, and the flatness in his voice told her this was the real question. If Creel decides to move on the claim before a court can hear anything, has Creel contacted you? Not yet. Bill thinks he may not even know Edmund sold, but once he finds out, when will he find out? Elias looked at her. The land office in Orrin. Property transfers are recorded. Anyone can look. He paused. Bill thinks he probably already knows. He just hasn't moved yet. Clara turned this over. A man like Creel doesn't wait on chance. He waits on timing. He lets people settle in, invest, build, so that when he moves, they have more to lose. That was the particular cruelty of that kind of patience. I'll go over everything again tonight, Clara said. The accounts, the deed, the letter. If there's anything in the record that shows Edmund acknowledged the debt after the sale, anything at all, it would support the argument that the obligation stayed with him. Elias looked at her. There it was again, that brief, complicated look that he didn't put words to. Why? He said. She met his eyes. Because it's the right thing to work on, she said, and because I'm good at it. That wasn't the whole answer, and they both knew it, but it was the answer she had. She worked until nearly midnight. The children had been in bed for 3 hours. The house settled into the particular hush of a family asleep, and Clara sat at the kitchen table with the lantern and the ledger books and her notebook and the deed and the letter from Edmund to Harriet, and she built the picture piece by piece, the way she'd learned to build a financial picture, starting with what you knew for certain and working outward from there. What she knew: Edmund Voss had borrowed $420 from Aldous Creel 4 years ago, using the grazing rights of the East section as security. He had failed to repay the debt. He had then sold the ranch to his brother without disclosing the encumbrance. The deed he'd provided contained deliberately obscured language. He had taken the proceeds and gone to Denver. What she suspected, Edmund had been taking money from ranch income for longer than the 18-month gap suggested. There were entries in the oldest ledger that didn't quite line up, small discrepancies, the kind that are easy to overlook one at a time, that become significant in aggregate. She added them. She added them again. She got the same number both times. The number was larger than $420. She sat back in her chair. The lamp flickered once as a draft moved through somewhere. If Edmund had been systematically skimming income over a longer period, and if that could be documented, and if Elias could demonstrate that Edmund had used those funds partly to service a debt that Edmund had deliberately passed along to Elias, that was not just a civil matter. That had another name. She didn't write that name down. She didn't need to. She just put a small mark in the margin of her notebook and moved on. There was a sound on the stairs. She looked up. Elias stood at the bottom in the dim light beyond the kitchen doorway in a work shirt and trousers, barefoot on the cold floor, looking at her the way a man looks at something that doesn't quite fit the category he's put it in. "You're still up," he said. "I'm close to something," she said. "I didn't want to stop." He came into the kitchen. He looked at the spread of papers on the table. The organized chaos of the afternoon transformed into careful order, columns of numbers with her notes beside them. He looked at her notebook. He couldn't read her shorthand, but he could see the shape of it, the accumulation of small marks that meant she'd found something, and something else. "What did you find?" he asked. "I need one more night to be sure," she said. "Tell me anyway." She looked at him. He was standing with his arms crossed, not defensively, just the position of a man who is very tired and is holding himself upright. The kitchen was cold. She could see his breath faintly. "I think the debt to Creel is only part of it," she said. I think Edmund was taking money from the ranch income for a longer period than the 18 months I found initially. Maybe 3 years. Maybe more. She tapped her notebook. If I'm right about the amounts, then the debt he borrowed against from Creel, he may have already covered it from ranch income before he sold the property. Elias stared at her. Then why does the lien still exist? Because Edmund paid himself, Clara said. He took the income, he kept it, and he never retired the debt with it. He let the debt stand and pocketed the money twice, once from the ranch income and once when he sold to you and walked away. The kitchen was very quiet. That's fraud, Elias said. That's what I think the numbers say, Clara said. I need one more night to make sure I haven't made an error. Numbers lie to you when you're tired. She began to straighten the papers. Go back to sleep. I'll have it for you in the morning. I'm not going to sleep, he said. Elias. She hadn't used his first name before. He noticed. She could see him notice. Go back to sleep. One of us being exhausted in the morning is enough. He looked at her for a moment longer. Then he did something she hadn't expected. He got down a second cup from the shelf, poured coffee from the pot she'd kept warm on the back of the stove, and set it on the table beside the ledger books. For when yours goes cold, he said, and he went upstairs. Clara looked at the cup. She looked at the papers. She picked up her pen. She worked until the lamp oil ran low, and she did not make an error, and what she found at the end of it was exactly what she'd suspected. She told him over breakfast while the children were still upstairs. She laid it out plainly. The 3 years of systematic skimming, the total amount, the overlap with the Creel debt, the evidence in the ledgers that pointed directly at Edmund's hand. She put her notebook on the table with the relevant figures, and she talked him through it the way she'd have talked a sensible person through any set of numbers, without drama and without softening. When she finished, Elias sat with his hands flat on the table and looked at the numbers for a long time. Bill Henderson can take this to the land office, he said. He can take it to the land office and to a territorial court, Clara said. With this documentation, you're not just defending against Creel's claim. You're demonstrating that Edmund defrauded you in the sale. That shifts the ground entirely. It means going after my own brother, Elias said. She said nothing. That was his to sit with. He needed money, Elias said. Not defending Edmund, just stating it. The way you state things you can't fully hate because you half understand them. Edmund he wasn't built for this, for the work. He liked the idea of the land, but not the doing of it. A pause. Ruth never trusted him. I thought she was too hard on him. She wasn't, Clara said. Elias looked at her. No, he said. She wasn't. From upstairs came the sound of Nora arguing with something, possibly her own bootlaces, based on the particular quality of the frustration, and then Thomas's voice, lower, saying something patient and probably unhelpful. Will you help me put together what Bill Henderson needs? Elias asked. I already started, Clara said. Last night. It's in the notebook. He looked at the notebook on the table. He looked at her. I thought you said you weren't a lawyer, he said. I'm not, but I'm good with numbers, and numbers don't need a lawyer to tell the truth. She got up to start the oatmeal. They just need someone patient enough to listen to them. She heard him pick up the notebook. She heard him go through the pages. The oatmeal pot went on the stove, and she stood with her back to him and listened to the silence that meant he was reading, really reading, and understanding what she'd built for him. Clara, he said. She turned. He was looking at her with the expression of a man who has had a room in his house locked for 2 years and has just found out there was never anything wrong with the room. He didn't say anything else. He didn't need to. Nora appeared at the bottom of the stairs with her boots on the correct feet and her coat inside out, saw both of them standing there, assessed the room with the fast accuracy of a child who has grown up reading adult weather, and announced, Is there oatmeal? There will be in 10 minutes, Claire said. Nora sat down at the table beside her father. She looked at the notebook he was holding. She looked at Clara. She looked at her father again. Is everything going to be all right? She asked. The question sat there, simple and enormous, and impossible to answer with complete honesty. We're working on it, Clara said. That was the true answer. That was all the true answer there was. Nora considered this and found it acceptable. She picked up her school book from beside the salt box where she'd left it the previous morning and opened it to the page she'd marked and began to read, quietly, to herself, her lips moving faintly on the harder words. Elias put the notebook down on the table. He looked at the window, at the white morning outside. He picked up his coffee. Clara went back to the oatmeal. The stove ticked and settled. Somewhere outside, a wind moved through the eaves of the house. Not the storm, not a threat. Just weather doing what weather does, testing the edges of things to see what held. The house held. It had held for 18 years, and it held now, and Clara stood at the stove and listened to it, and did not let herself think too far ahead. Bill Henderson rode out to Blackthorn 3 days after the storm cleared, on a morning cold enough that his horse's breath came in steady white plumes all the way up the drive. Clara watched him come from the kitchen window, a compact man in his 60s with a lawyer's careful way of moving. Like every step was a sentence he'd already edited twice. Elias met him at the porch, and they stood there talking for a few minutes before coming inside. And Clara put coffee on without being asked, and took herself to the hallway with the mending basket, because some conversations needed the room. She didn't need to hear it. She'd already given Elias everything she had. What she heard, despite not trying to hear it, was the rise and fall of 2 men talking about money and law, and a third man who was in Denver, not thinking about either. She heard Bill Henderson say the word territorial and the word documentation, and once, with a particular weight, the word egregious. She heard Elias say almost nothing. When Henderson left an hour later, Elias stood at the window and watched him go. Clara came back into the kitchen and began washing the coffee cups. "He thinks we have a case," Elias said. "I know," Clara said. "He said whoever put the numbers together knew what they were doing." "The numbers put themselves together," Clara said. "I just wrote them down in the right order." Elias turned from the window. He looked at her in a way that had become slightly less opaque over the past few days. Not open, not warm in any obvious way, but less like a man who decided not to look, and more like a man who was looking and hadn't decided what to do about it yet. "He's going to write to the territorial court in Cheyenne," Elias said, "and to Edmund." "Edmund will need to respond," Clara said. "Edmund won't like that." "No," Clara agreed. "He won't." There was a pause. Outside, Henderson's horse had disappeared around the tree line, and the yard was empty and very white. "Creel still hasn't moved," Elias said. "He's waiting to see what Edmund does," Clara said. "Or what you do. Men like Creel prefer to let other people's panicking do their work for them." She set the last cup on the shelf. "Don't panic." "I wasn't planning to." "Good." The valley began to talk. That was how Elias put it. The valley began to talk. And Clara understood quickly what he meant. In a remote ranching community stretched across 40 miles of Powder River country, news moved slowly in winter, but it moved completely, person to person, ranch to kitchen to church hall. And what the valley knew by the second week of December was approximately this. Elias Voss had taken in a woman off the stage road who'd arrived as a supposed mail-order bride, sent away the arrangement before it properly started, and then let her stay anyway under circumstances that nobody could quite pin down. Clara heard about it from Nora, who had heard it from a girl named Patience Okafor, whose family ran the neighboring spread to the east. Patience had relayed it with the particular accuracy of a 10-year-old who doesn't yet understand social delicacy, which is to say, completely accurately. "She said people are saying you're a charity case," Nora reported, at breakfast, with the face of someone delivering a medical diagnosis. Factual. Concerned. Slightly too direct. "People say a lot of things," Clara said. She said some of the women at the Valley meeting think it's... She said the word improper. Nora tried the word out. "Is it improper?" "Not in any way that matters," Clara said. Nora considered this. "What way is that?" "The practical way," Clara said. She put a bowl of oatmeal in front of the girl. "Eat." Elias had heard the same things from other directions. Clara could tell by the way he carried himself when he came in from a ride into Orrin for supplies. That particular set of the jaw, that meant he'd heard something he hadn't liked and had chosen not to engage with it. He didn't tell her directly. She didn't ask him directly. They had arrived, over the past 2 weeks, at a kind of parallel awareness of each other that didn't require narrating. What he did do the afternoon he came back from Orin was set a package on the kitchen table, brown paper and twine, and say, without looking at her, "There's a women's meeting at the Calloway place next Thursday. Frances Calloway usually runs it. She's decent enough. It might be worth going." Clara looked at the package. She looked at him. "To show people I'm not a scandal," she said. "To show people you exist," he said. "There's a difference." He hung his coat up. "The package is for you. I picked it up from the dry goods. It was in the order I placed last month. I didn't need it." She opened it. It was wool. Good heavy wool, dark blue, enough for a coat. She stood with it in her hands for a moment and could not immediately find a way to be practical about it. "Thank you," she said finally. "It gets colder than this before February," he said, and went to wash up for dinner. The Calloway meeting was 12 women in a parlor that was slightly too small for 12 women, with tea that was slightly too weak, and a fire that was fighting hard against the drafts in the old house. Clara sat near the window and was examined with the thoroughness that only a small community can manage. Not rudely, mostly, but completely. She was measured and categorized and held up against various prior understandings of what a woman in her situation was supposed to be. Frances Calloway herself was a broad-shouldered woman of 50-something with rough hands and a direct manner that Clara immediately respected. She introduced Clara to the room simply. "This is Clara Whitmore. She's been helping Elias Voss get through the winter at Blackthorn," and moved on without elaborating, which was either very kind or very shrewd or both. The other women were a mix. Most were ranchers' wives, a few with adult daughters. One, Margaret Bryce, who was the wife of the local land agent and who looked at Clara with a fixed smile that didn't reach her eyes and asked, with perfect sweetness, "And what are your plans once the pass opens in the spring?" "I haven't decided yet," Clara said. "You must have some idea," Margaret said. "A woman your age, on her own?" She let the sentence trail in a way that was meant to land somewhere particular. "A woman my age on her own usually has several ideas," Clara said. "The question is which one to act on first." There was a small silence. An older woman named Vera Toms, who'd been sitting next to Clara and had the look of someone who'd been through enough weather to find most things amusing, made a sound that might have been a cough. Margaret Bryce smiled more firmly. "Of course," she said. The meeting moved on to practical matters. A collection for the Orin school teacher who'd been ill, the question of road maintenance after the storm damage. Clara listened and contributed when she had something to contribute and said nothing when she didn't, and by the end of the afternoon she had the sense that the room had revised its initial verdict somewhat. Not universally. Margaret Bryce's smile did not change, but Frances Calloway caught her eye as the women were putting on their coats and gave her a nod that meant something. On the ride back, Elias had sent Thomas with the wagon. Clara sat in the wagon bed with the cold wind on her face and thought about what it would mean to be a known quantity in this valley, to be a person who existed here in a way that had a name and a shape. She had not been that in a long time. In Laramie, she'd been a boarder at Mrs. Ogg's house, and before that, she'd been the bookkeeper at the hardware store, and before that, she'd been other things in other places, and in all of them, she'd been legible to other people only through her function, what she did, not who she was. She wasn't sure, sitting in the back of Elias Voss's wagon in the Powder River country in December, who she was exactly, but she thought she might be finding out. Thomas said without preamble, about halfway home. "Patience Okafor's family is talking about selling their east section." Clara looked at the back of his head. He was driving and not looking at her. "Who told you that?" "Patience told Nora. Her father had a meeting with someone from Cheyenne last week." He paused. "A land broker." Clara was quiet. "Is that Creole?" Thomas asked. "I don't know," Clara said, which was true, but her stomach did something tight and specific at the word broker. "If Creel gets the Okafor section and the east section from us," Thomas started. "He's not getting the east section from us," Clara said. "Mr. Henderson is working on it." "But if he did," Thomas said, with the persistence of a boy who has thought about something and wants to think about it out loud, "he'd have a strip of land from the river to the ridge. Nobody could move cattle through there without going around 20 miles. Clara looked at the white fields on either side of the track. She knew enough about land and water rights to understand what that meant. Control one corridor, and you could squeeze everyone on either side of it. "Talk to your father," she said. "Tonight." Thomas clicked to the horse. "He'll say it's not certain." "Tell him anyway," Clara said. "Certain comes after you act on uncertain, not before." Thomas was quiet for a moment. "You sound like Ma used to," he said. It was said simply, without weight, the way a person notes a resemblance without assigning it meaning. Clara looked at the tree line. What was she like? "Practical," Thomas said. "She didn't have patience for people who made problems out of nothing, but she had a lot of patience for real problems." He thought about it. "She used to say that most of what people call bad luck is just delayed consequence, things that were already coming." "She was right about that," Clara said. "Pa doesn't say things like that anymore." A pause. "He doesn't say much like that. The things he used to say." Clara let that sit. She didn't add anything to it because it didn't need anything added. Well, she told Elias about the Okafor land that evening, after the children were in bed. He sat with it, working through the implications the same way he worked through everything, methodically, without shortcuts. "If Creel moves on the Okafors before Henderson's filing reaches the court," he started. "Then he has a stronger position," Clara said. "Yes. The Okafors have 3 children and a 40-year mortgage," Elias said. "If Creel offered them a fair price, they might take it. Victor Okafor doesn't need to fight if he doesn't have to." "Does Victor Okafor know what Creel is building?" Clara asked. Elias looked at her. "Probably not. Creel doesn't tell people the whole picture when he buys." "Then someone should tell him." She paused. "Before Thursday. Henderson said the filing would be in Cheyenne by Thursday." Elias rubbed his jaw. "Victor and I haven't spoken much this winter." "Why not?" "We had a disagreement last spring about the creek boundary. Nothing. It was small. Both of us were too proud about it." He exhaled. "I've been meaning to go over." "Go tomorrow," Clara said. He looked at her. "You don't pull your punches." "Do you want me to?" He was quiet for a moment. "No," he said. Then, after another pause, "No, I don't." Ciao. He rode to the Okafors the next morning. Clara did not know what was said. She worked the morning at the ledger books, adding the last entries to the summary she'd prepared for Henderson, and she mended and she read with Nora, and she started a pot of bean soup for dinner. At noon it began to snow again. Not the aggression of the first storm, just steady, determined snow, the kind that falls all day and accumulates without drama. Elias came back at mid-afternoon. He came in shaking snow from his coat, and something about the way he moved told her it had gone well. Not triumphantly, nothing as simple as that, but well. He didn't know, Elias said, hanging up his coat. About the land corridor. He thought Creel was just interested in buying a section he didn't need. And now? Now he's going to talk to his wife. Elias poured himself water from the pitcher. And then he's going to talk to Henderson. Clara nodded. She went back to the soup. "He asked about you," Elias said. She looked up. "Victor Okafor asked about me?" "He said Patience had told him about the woman at Blackthorn who went over the accounts." A pause. "He said if you ever wanted work going over accounts for other people in the valley, he knew at least 4 families who'd pay for it." Clara turned back to the soup. She stirred it once, unnecessarily. "That's something to consider," she said, and kept her voice from doing anything particular. What neither of them planned for was Aldous Creel himself. He arrived on a Tuesday 10 days before Christmas, in a hired buggy with the driver and a man who sat beside him with the particular stillness of someone who is employed to be physically significant. Creel himself was not imposing in the physical way. He was slight, maybe 55, with a neat gray beard and the unhurried manner of a man who has won enough arguments to stop being anxious about them. He wore a good coat. His boots were expensive and wrong for the conditions. Clara saw him from the sewing room window before Elias did. She watched the buggy come up the drive and she felt something go very calm and very clear inside her, the way things go calm before a specific kind of difficulty. She went downstairs. Elias was already at the door by the time she reached the bottom of the stairs. He'd seen the buggy from the barn. He stood in the doorway with his arms at his sides and his face set in that particular careful way. Not hostile, just closed. "Mr. Creel," he said. "Mr. Voss." Creel stopped at the porch steps and looked up at Elias with a pleasant professional smile. "I apologize for arriving without notice. The weather made the road uncertain and I wasn't sure of my timing." "What can I do for you?" Elias said. Creel glanced past Elias and found Clara standing in the hallway. His eyes moved over her with quick professional assessment. "I'd rather speak inside if you don't mind. It's cold." "We can speak here," Elias said. Something shifted minimally in Creel's expression. Not displeasure, just recalibration. "Of course," he said. "I'll be direct then. I understand from the land office in Orin that you've recently filed documentation with the territorial court in Cheyenne regarding a lien against your east section. I want you to know that I'm not here as an adversary." "Good," Elias said. "The matter between your brother and myself was a business arrangement that went sideways. I don't hold you responsible for Edmund's choices." Creel's voice was smooth and reasonable, and Clara noticed that every sentence he spoke sounded like the beginning of a favor. "What I'd like to propose is a settlement that works for both of us. I'll release the lien entirely in exchange for a straightforward purchase of the east section at fair market value. You walk away clear. No court proceedings, no—" "The east section isn't for sale," Elias said. Creel paused. "Mr. Voss, I understand the attachment." "It's not attachment," Elias said. "It's the best grazing on this property. I need it to run cattle through spring." A pause. "And you need it to complete a land corridor from the river to the ridge. That's not a coincidence." Creel looked at him for a moment. He looked at Clara again. She could see him reassessing. Not alarmed, but revising his understanding of what he was dealing with. "You've done your homework," Creel said. "Someone did," Elias said. Creel looked at Clara a third time, and this time the look was specific. He had, she thought, a quick mind, the kind that sorts information rapidly and arrives at correct conclusions without needing them explained. "Miss," he started. "Whitmore," she said. "Clara Whitmore." "Miss Whitmore." He said her name the way people say a name when they're filing it somewhere. "Are you Mr. Voss's legal representative?" "I'm nobody's legal representative," Clara said. "I keep accounts." "She keeps accounts," Elias confirmed. Creel looked between them. He was still pleasant, still unhurried, but something underneath that pleasantness had shifted slightly, the way ice shifts when weight moves across it. "The territorial court will take time," Creel said. "Months. In the meantime, the lien stands and your deed is complicated. Buyers, lenders, anyone who looks at the title—" "We know what it means," Clara said. "We've spoken with a lawyer." "Then you know that I have a legitimate legal instrument. You have a legitimate legal instrument against a man who defrauded the current owner of this property," Clara said. "The court filing documents that fraud in considerable detail. Any action you take against this property, while that filing is before the court, will be examined in that context." She paused. "I imagine your lawyer told you the same thing." Creel was quiet for a moment. He looked at her with something that was not, she thought, hostility. It was closer to the look a chess player gives when a piece has moved unexpectedly. "You're well informed," he said. "The numbers inform themselves," she said. "I just read them." He turned back to Elias. "My offer stands. Fair market value, clean title, immediate resolution." He said it without the earlier smoothness, more directly, which she thought meant he was taking Elias more seriously now. "Think about it before Thursday. After the filing is active, the situation gets harder to resolve quietly." "I'll think about it," Elias said, which they both knew meant no. Creel nodded. He looked once more at Clara, a final assessing look, and then he turned and walked back to the buggy with the same unhurried step, the expensive boots silent on the packed snow. The buggy turned and went back down the drive. Elias watched it go. "He'll be back," Elias said. "Probably," Clara said. "He's looking for a weakness." "Yes." Elias turned to look at her. "You weren't afraid of him." "I was a little afraid of him," she said honestly. "He's smart and he's patient and he has money and legal instruments on his side. Those are real things to be afraid of." She looked down the empty drive. "But fear and panic are different. You can be afraid and still think clearly." Elias was quiet. The snow kept falling, steady and indifferent. My father used to say that you could tell a man's real intentions by what he offered when he thought he had you cornered, Elias said. Creel offered to buy the land. That means he still wants it more than he wants to fight. And that means you have something he needs, Clara said, which means you have more room than it looks like. That evening, after supper, Elias stood in the kitchen doorway while Clara washed the dishes and said, without particular preamble, "There are things I should have told you." She didn't turn around. "About the property? About why I said yes when you offered to work?" He paused. "I told myself it was practical. The accounts needed doing, the mending. That was real." Another pause. "But Nora, I know," Clara said. "She hasn't—" He stopped, tried again. "Since Ruth died, she hasn't had anyone to—" He stopped again. "I know," Clara said again, more quietly this time. The water in the basin was going cold. She finished the last cup and dried her hands and turned around. He was standing in the doorway with his arms crossed and his jaw set in that way he had. The look of a man who has said more than he planned and isn't sure how to handle the distance between what he meant and what he said. "You don't owe me an explanation," she said. "I know I don't," he said. "I'm giving you one anyway." He looked at the window, the dark outside. She needed someone. I'm not able to be everything she needs, I know that. And Thomas, a short sound, almost something rueful. Thomas is almost a man and he's been trying to act like one since the day Ruth died. And that shouldn't be his job yet. "No," Clara said. "It shouldn't." "You've been good for them," he said. He said it like it cost him something. Not in a bad way. More like honesty costs you in the way that admitting a debt costs you, even a debt you're glad to have. Clara looked at him. In the dim kitchen light, he was just a tired man standing in a doorway with roughened hands and gray eyes and the particular weight of someone who has been doing too many things alone for too long. "They've been good for me," she said, because that was also true, and he deserved the full account. He held her gaze for a moment longer than either of them had done before. Then he nodded once, the small, definite nod, and said, "I'm going to check the horses," and went out the back door into the snow. Clara stood in the kitchen and listened to the door shut and the quiet settle back around her. 4 days before Christmas, the second storm came. This one announced itself properly, a falling barometer that Elias checked twice in the morning with increasing quiet, a sky that went the yellow-gray of old bone by noon, a wind that picked up from the northwest and didn't stop picking up. The temperature dropped 15 degrees between breakfast and midday dinner. "Worse than the last one?" Clara asked, watching Elias come in from the barn. "Different," he said, which she'd learned by now meant yes. He spent the afternoon securing what needed securing, the loose fence boards, the barn doors, the woodpile, a section of roof on the equipment shed that had been worrying him since November. Thomas helped. Clara sent them both out with extra scarves and did not ask if they needed help, because she knew the answer was no, and knew also that asking would have annoyed Elias in a specific way she'd come to recognize. What she did was fill every pot and basin with water, because she'd grown up enough places to know that pipes could freeze, and bring the indoor woodpile to capacity, and check that the larder had what they'd need for 3 days if they couldn't get out, and make sure the children's warmest things were accessible and not buried in a chest somewhere. By 4 o'clock the light was gone, and the wind was serious, and Nora was sitting at the kitchen table with her school book and a blanket around her shoulders, reading with the determined concentration of a child who has been told to stay inside and means to do it usefully. Elias came in at 4:30, stamping snow, and looked around the kitchen with the particular look of a man who has walked into a situation that has been handled without him. "The water," he said. "Done," Clara said. "The wood pile, done. Elias." She didn't say it sharply, just evenly. "It's done." He stopped. He looked at the room, at Nora with her blanket and her book, at the stacked wood, at the full water vessels, at the pot of soup already going on the stove. He looked at Clara. He didn't say anything, but something in his face did something, small and quick, like a window opening and closing, that she thought she would remember. Thomas came in behind him and assessed the kitchen with the same quick scan his father had done. "You even got the extra lamp oil," he said. "I got the extra lamp oil," Claire confirmed. Good, Thomas said in the tone of someone issuing approval to a plan they'd have made themselves, and went to hang up his coat. The storm peaked around midnight. Clara lay in the sewing room and listened to it. The particular sustained violence of a Wyoming blizzard that is nothing like the storm she'd known in other places, lower and flatter and more exposed. The house groaned and adjusted and held. The stovepipe in the sewing room clicked and breathed. She was nearly asleep when she heard the horse. Not the barn horses. Those were secure. She'd heard Elias double-check the latch before he came in. This was outside, in the yard, a sound half lost in the wind but distinct when the wind paused. A horse in distress. That particular high note of an animal in trouble. She sat up, heard it. A minute passed, then two. She got up. She put on everything she had. 2 shirts, her dress, the new wool coat Elias had bought, an extra pair of stockings, her heaviest boots. She wrapped a scarf around her head and face until only her eyes showed. She took the barn lantern from the hook by the back door and the box of matches from the shelf. She opened the back door, and the storm hit her like a wall that had been waiting. The snow was driving sideways, and the temperature had dropped to something that hurt to breathe. She bent into it and moved toward the barn by memory and by the faint glow of the lantern through the flying white. She was 10 feet from the barn when she saw him. He wasn't on a horse. He was in the snow, 20 yards past the barn, half sitting and half collapsed against the fence post that marked the beginning of the north pasture. And he was not moving. Her mind did the arithmetic fast. He'd heard something after she had, gone out alone to check without waking anyone. His horse had slipped or shied in the dark and thrown him, and now he was down in the snow in a blizzard with no one knowing where he was. She ran. Running in 2.5 feet of snow in a blizzard with a lantern is not running. It is fighting, step by step, against resistance that pushes back. She lost a foot twice and kept going. The cold was absolute. The kind that doesn't register as cold so much as pressure, as though the air itself was trying to compress her. She reached him. Elias. She got a hand on his shoulder. He was conscious, she could see his eyes, but dazed, the particular daze of someone who has hit their head or is early in hypothermia and can't quite get their thoughts in order. His coat was already stiff with ice on the outer surface. Horse, he said, and then something that wasn't a full word. The horse is fine, she said. She didn't know if this was true. She said it because it was the right thing to say right now. Can you stand? He tried. His right leg took his weight and his left didn't. She felt him lurch and caught him with her shoulder under his arm, the lantern swinging wildly in her other hand. Left leg, she said. Can you bend it? He tried. Yes. Hurts. Can you walk on it? Another try, a sound that was not quite a word but told her approximately what she needed to know. Lean on me, she said. Put all the weight you need on me. We're going to the barn first because it's closer. She got her arm around his waist and his arm over her shoulder, and she turned them into the wind and started moving. It was 20 yards. It took what felt like 10 minutes. She got him into the barn and kicked the door shut behind them, and the howl of the storm dropped to a sustained roar that was at least not in her face. The lantern light steadied. The horses shifted in their stalls but didn't panic. She got him onto a hay bale. She looked at his leg. Not broken. She could see that much, the way he was holding it, but he'd twisted something, knee or ankle, hard enough that it wasn't taking weight. How bad? She said. I've had worse, he said. That's not an answer to the question I asked. He looked at her. He was starting to come back to himself. She could see the daze clearing, the sharpness returning to his eyes. Bad enough, he said. I'll need the crutch from the equipment room. Left wall. She found it. She brought it back. I need to get you to the house, she said. I can manage. You can manage with help, she said. Don't argue with me about this. He looked at her for a moment. Were you always this? This what? This direct. Since I was 14, she said. He made the sound that was the closest thing to a laugh she'd heard from him. Not quite a laugh, more like a sound that remembered what a laugh was. He took the crutch, and she got under his other arm, and they went back into the storm, the barn door crashing behind them, and they crossed the 20 yards to the house that were somehow harder this time, slower, his weight real against her, the wind screaming in from the northwest like something with a personal grievance. She got him inside. She got the door shut. She got him into the kitchen chair and the lamp lit and his coat off and his boot carefully off the left foot, and she looked at his ankle in the lamplight. Swollen, already purpling at the outside edge, twisted, not broken. She thought not broken, though she was not a doctor and said so. "It's not broken," Elias said. "How do you know?" "Because I've broken the other one and it felt different," he said. She packed it in snow from the bucket by the door, the particular Wyoming pragmatism of using what was available, and wrapped it with strips of cloth from the rag drawer, and she made him keep it elevated on the second chair while she heated water for tea. "You heard the horse from inside the house," Elias said, behind her. "I heard something," she said. "I didn't hear it. I thought—" He stopped. She could hear him putting it together. "You were already up. You were already on your way out." She didn't correct him. She poured the tea. "I would have frozen out there," he said. It was a plain statement, no drama in it, the arithmetic of the situation. "You would have been fine in another hour or two," she said, handing him the tea. "Probably." He looked up at her. "Clara." It was the second time he'd used her name. It sounded different than it had in the accounts conversation, less transactional, more like a word he'd chosen from other possible words. "Don't," she said, not unkindly. "Drink your tea. I'll check the horse." "Clara, Elias." She held his gaze. "The horse first, then we can talk." She wrapped the scarf back around her face and went back out into the storm. The horse was in the far corner of the paddock, shaking and skittish but uninjured. A loose board in the paddock fence had been banging in the wind, that was all. Nothing more than noise and fear. Clara caught the horse, spoke to her quietly for a few minutes until the shaking stopped, and got her into the barn. She stood in the barn for a moment alone with the sound of the storm on the roof and the warmth of the horses on either side of her. Her hands were shaking. She looked at them. She hadn't noticed during she'd been too busy. But now that it was done, her body was informing her of its own opinion about what she'd just done, which was that it had been cold and hard and frightening, and it wasn't something she'd had to do but had done anyway. She stood there until the shaking stopped. Then she went back to the house. Elias was where she'd left him, his ankle on the chair, his tea half drunk, his face in the complicated territory it had been occupying more frequently lately. He looked at her when she came in, dripping snow, her face red from the cold, the scarf still around her neck. "She's fine," Clara said. "Loose board, that's all." He nodded. She hung up her coat. She poured the last of the tea into her own cup and sat down across from him at the kitchen table. "You were going to say something," she said. "Several things," he said. He looked at the table between them. "I don't know which one to start with." "Start with the easiest one," Clara said. He looked up at her. In the lamplight his eyes were the particular gray that absorbs light, that takes things in without giving a reflection back, and she thought that she had been wrong about that quality when she'd first noticed it. She'd thought it meant he kept things from you. She was starting to think it meant he kept things until he was sure of them. "Thank you," he said. "For tonight." "That was the easy one?" she said. Something moved across his face. "Yes," he said. "It was." She drank her tea. The storm pressed on the house, and the house held. And neither of them said anything else for a while. And the silence between them was not the silence of two people who had nothing to say. It was the silence of two people who had too much and were choosing, carefully, where to begin. The second storm cleared by Christmas Eve morning, leaving the world outside Blackthorn Ranch so white, and still it looked painted. Elias's ankle kept him off it for 3 days. He was a poor patient in the specific way that capable men are poor patients, meaning he tried to stand on it approximately every 4 hours, and was surprised each time when it didn't cooperate. Clara told him on the second day that if he kept testing it, he'd turn a sprain into something that required a doctor, and he said he understood, and then tried to stand on it again 2 hours later. She stopped telling him after that and simply removed the crutch from his reach when she thought he was about to do something inadvisable, which worked better. The children decorated the house with what they had: pine boughs that Thomas cut from the tree line, a string of dried berries that Nora had put up in October without telling anyone, 2 candles saved from the last supply run. It was spare by most standards and perfectly adequate by the standards of Blackthorn Ranch. And on Christmas Eve, the four of them sat in the kitchen with the stove going full and the candles lit, and Elias told a story. It wasn't announced. He just started talking, the way a person starts talking when the right conditions arrive after a long drought. Not dramatically, just finding the words there when before there hadn't been words. He told a story about the first winter he and Ruth had spent on this land, before the house was what it was now, when they'd lived in what was now the storage cabin and called it an adventure, because they were young enough that calling something an adventure was sufficient to make it one. He told it imperfectly, with pauses in the wrong places, and one detail he had to revise halfway through, and Nora and Thomas listened with the particular attention of children who are hearing something they've been waiting for without knowing they were waiting. Clara sat with her hands around a cup of coffee and looked at the candle flame and said nothing, because it wasn't her story, and the room didn't need her in it right then. It needed what was already in it. When he finished, Nora said, "Tell another one." And Elias said, "Maybe tomorrow." And Nora accepted this as the reasonable installment plan it was. Clara looked up from the candle and found Elias looking at her. It was brief. He looked away first. The letter from Denver came the day after Christmas, carried by the Orin postal rider who made his winter rounds in a canvas-covered cart that looked held together primarily by optimism. Elias brought it inside without opening it and set it on the kitchen table and stood there looking at it the way you look at something you recognize is going to rearrange things. The return address was Edmund Voss, care of a hotel in Denver. Elias opened it. He read it standing at the table. His face while reading was the controlled face, the face he put on when what he was reading required control. But Clara, who had been in this kitchen long enough to learn the difference between his kinds of quiet, could see that the control was working harder than usual. He set the letter on the table. He pushed it toward her without speaking. She read it. Edmund Voss wrote the way Edmund Voss apparently did everything, smoothly and around the edges of things. The letter covered 3 pages and said, at its essential core, that the matter of the lien had come to his attention through Henderson's filing, that he was naturally concerned and wished to be helpful, that there had been a misunderstanding in the terms of the property transfer which he was sure could be resolved between brothers without need for territorial courts, and that he proposed to return to Wyoming in the spring to discuss the matter in person. He said nothing about the $420. He said nothing about the 3 years of skimmed income. He said nothing about the letter to Harriet that had been sitting in the back of his own ledger for 4 years. He closed by asking after the children and wishing Elias a prosperous new year. Clara set the letter down. "He knows what Henderson filed," she said. "He knows we have the accounts." "Yes," Elias said. "He's proposing a delay," she said. "Spring is 4 months away. In 4 months, Creel can move on the Okafors. In 4 months, the court timeline gets muddier. In 4 months, I know what 4 months means," Elias said. She was quiet. He picked up the letter and read it again, this time more slowly, and she could see him looking for what wasn't there, which was the more useful reading. "He doesn't deny the fraud," Elias said. "No," Clara said. "He doesn't. He also doesn't admit it. He calls it a misunderstanding." "Yes, a misunderstanding." Elias set the letter down again with more force than he'd intended. Ruth was right about him. She was always right about him, and I kept finding reasons to... He stopped. He looked at the window. "I lent him money twice before the ranch sale. Did you know that? He paid back most of the first and none of the second, and when I asked him about it, he said things had been tight and then changed the subject. And I let him change it." A pause. "Because he's my brother." Clara said nothing. She let that sit where it needed to sit. "Write back to him," she said finally. Elias looked at her. "What?" "Write back. Don't accuse him of anything. Don't threaten anything. Just write back and say you'll see him in the spring, and that in the meantime you're confident the court filing speaks for itself." She paused. "Let him wonder what you have. Men like Edmund. And I've dealt with men like Edmund, not brothers, but the same kind. They're most dangerous when they think they know exactly what you know. Let him wonder." Elias looked at her for a long moment. "And Creel?" "Henderson needs to move faster," Clara said. I can write up a summary of the accounting evidence that makes the timeline of Edmund's fraud explicit, not just the gap, but the full 3 years, month by month. If Henderson can attach that to an amended filing and argue that any claim Creel presses against the property is contingent on a fraudulent transfer, it makes it harder for a judge to ignore. She paused. Is Henderson willing to move faster? If I ask him to, Elias said. Ask him, Clara said. He looked at her. The look lasted long enough to become something other than a look. She held it without looking away, and without knowing entirely what she was holding. What did I do, he said, before you got here? She picked up the letter and folded it back along its lines. The same things you're doing now, she said. You just had less information. He almost said something. She could see it. A sentence that started in his chest and made it as far as his jaw and then stopped. He turned away instead and went to get paper for the letter. She wrote the accounting summary. It took her 2 days and filled 11 pages of careful, precise documentation. Dates, amounts, cross-references. The whole 3-year picture laid out in sequence that made Edmund's choices legible, as choices rather than errors. When she was done, she read it through 3 times for accuracy and once more to make sure it was the kind of document a territorial judge could follow without a degree in finance, and then she gave it to Elias, who read it and then read it again. This is, he started. Comprehensive, she offered. I was going to say damning, he said. That too, she agreed. He folded it and put it in the envelope with Henderson's amended filing materials and sent Thomas to Orrin with it the next morning. Then he sat in the kitchen and did what you do after you've done everything you can do. He waited. The waiting was its own kind of hard, and Clara knew this about him without being told, because she could see it in how he moved through the days after the letters went out. He worked harder than he needed to. Longer hours in the barn, unnecessary repairs, the kind of physical busyness that is really just anxiety looking for an outlet. He talked less than usual, which was saying something. Clara worked around him the way you work around weather, not fighting it, just adjusting. New Year's came and went without ceremony. The pass remained closed. January settled over the Powder River country with the particular relentlessness of a Wyoming January, which does not feel the need to apologize for itself. The temperature dropped to places that required everyone to move through the day with intention. You didn't step outside without purpose because the cold would collect your carelessness and present it to you as a bill. Clara had been at Blackthorn Ranch for 5 weeks. She knew this because she kept her own accounting in her head, the same way she'd always kept track of time in places she was temporary, a habit from years of knowing that the counting mattered, that the number of days was a number you needed to have available when the question came. When the pass opened, she would have been here roughly 12 weeks, give or take the weather. She had stopped thinking about the pass every morning. She noticed this one day in the middle of January, that she'd gone several days without calculating the thaw timeline, without mentally mapping the route to Cheyenne, without the low-running background calculation of next steps. She noticed it and didn't know what to do with the noticing, so she put it aside and went back to what was in front of her. What was in front of her on the particular afternoon she noticed this was Thomas's boots. He'd outgrown them, or rather, he'd been outgrowing them for 2 months and hadn't said anything, apparently operating on the frontier teenager's theory that if you don't acknowledge a problem, it might resolve itself. Clara had noticed the way he walked in the cold and asked him about it directly, which produced a reddening of the ears that she chose to interpret as gratitude. She was working out whether the leather could be let out at the toe when Elias came into the kitchen and said, "I got a letter from Frances Calloway." Clara set down the boot. "About?" Elias put the letter on the table. "She's asking if you'd be willing to help the Moser family with their accounts. Martin Moser is laid up, back injury from the fall. And Frances says their records are in bad shape, and they're going to have trouble with their spring taxes if someone doesn't go over them." Clara looked at the letter. Frances Calloway is asking on the Mosers' behalf? Frances Calloway does most things on most people's behalf around here, Elias said. It's more or less her occupation. He paused. She's also asking if you'd be willing to look at the Valley School's financial records. There's been a question about the school fund going back 2 years. Clara looked up at him. How many people has she asked you about? 4, he said. The Mosers, the school, and 2 others. And you're telling me, she said. I'm telling you because it's your decision, he said. The weather's been holding. Once it breaks, some of those roads will be passable. If you wanted to take on some of that work, I'd need a way to get there and back. I can drive you, he said, or Thomas can, or you could take the smaller horse if you feel comfortable with her. He paused. She's steady in snow, gentler than the roan. Clara looked at the letter again. 4 families. The school fund. The kind of work she'd done in pieces throughout her life. In Laramie, in 2 places before Laramie, but always as an employee of one specific person, never as something that belonged to her. What would people pay for that kind of work? She asked. Around here? Probably not money. Hookish. He said it without apology. Goods, livestock sometimes, flour, preserved food. It depends on the family. That's all right, Clara said. He looked at her. You're considering it. I'm considering it, she said. He nodded. He picked up the letter, intending to put it somewhere, and then seemed to reconsider and left it on the table. I'll write to Frances, he said, unless you want to. I'll write to her, Clara said. She wrote to Frances Calloway that evening and received a reply within 3 days that was warm and practical in equal measure. The letter of a woman who managed people the way good ranchers manage land, which is to say with attention to what was actually there rather than what you wished was there. Frances named a starting date in the 3rd week of January and said she would arrange for the relevant families to have their records ready. She moves fast, Clara said when the reply came. She always has, Elias said. Half the valley runs on Frances Calloway's organizational capacity. The other half doesn't know it yet. Clara looked at the letter. She says the school fund discrepancy goes back to a treasurer named Hatch, who left the valley in the fall of 1885. Gideon Hatch, Elias said. He sold his place to Creel. Clara looked up. I know, Elias said. I thought the same thing when I read it. Go. She went to the Moser place first, on a Tuesday when the cold had backed off enough to be merely unpleasant rather than dangerous. Elias drove her in the smaller wagon and waited outside with the horse, while Clara sat at Martin Moser's kitchen table with a woman named Delphine Moser, who had the particular exhaustion of a person who has been doing 2 people's jobs since her husband's injury and would not admit this to anyone, including herself. The records were bad. Not fraudulent, just neglected in the specific way of a family that's been in crisis mode long enough that paperwork stops feeling real. Clara sorted through them without comment and asked questions when she needed answers, and did not remark on the state of the filing, which would have been unkind and useless in equal measure. She identified the problem within 2 hours. A duplicate recording of a cattle sale that had inflated their apparent income and would cause them to over-report to the territorial tax assessor. She also found 3 supply invoices that had been paid but not recorded as expenses, which when properly accounted for would offset the tax liability significantly. She explained it to Delphine Moser in plain language, going through it twice until Delphine's expression shifted from defensive tension to something closer to relief. You're saying we actually owe less than we thought, Delphine said. About 40% less, Clara said, once these invoices are entered correctly. Delphine looked at the papers and then at Clara. Martin kept saying the numbers couldn't be right, she said. He kept saying so, but he couldn't find where it had gone wrong. It went wrong here, Clara said, pointing. It's a common error. You record a sale twice if you log it at the time and then log it again from the invoice. Once you know to look for it, it won't happen again, Delphine said firmly. No, Clara said. It won't. She came out of the Moser house 2 hours after she'd gone in and found Elias standing with the horse, not impatiently, just standing in the way he stood when he had nowhere else to be and was at peace with that. He looked at her when she came out. Well, he said. Fixed, she said, and they know how to keep it fixed going forward. He helped her up onto the wagon seat. She could have gotten up herself and did not say so. Martin Moser's going to tell everyone he knows, Elias said, clicking to the horse. That would be fine, Clara said. I don't mind the work. He glanced at her sidelong. You're good at it, he said. Simple statement, no elaboration. I know, she said. Simple answer, same way. He looked back at the road and they drove home through the pale January afternoon, and the easy quiet between them had a different texture than the careful quiet of the early weeks. Less like two people managing a space, and more like two people who had found out they could share one. The letter from the Denver agency arrived on the 23rd of January. It came from the Cheyenne office of a woman named Mrs. Elspeth Graw, who ran a placement agency for domestic workers and housekeepers. Not the matchmaking agency Edmund had used, a different operation entirely, respectable in the specific way that agencies run by women with good references tend to be. Mrs. Graw had heard of Clara through a chain that Clara could only partially reconstruct. Frances Calloway had apparently mentioned her to someone who had mentioned her to someone else who had written to Mrs. Graw. The letter offered Clara a position as a household manager for a family in Denver. The family was well situated. The letter said established, which Clara had learned was the word people used when they meant wealthy, but didn't want to sound like they were advertising it. The household had 4 children, a staff of 3, and a need for someone to manage accounts and run the domestic operations with competence. The salary was $40 a month, which was more money than Clara had ever been offered at one time. There was a house on the property for the household manager's use. The position started in April, which was just after the pass would reliably open. Clara read the letter twice at the kitchen table, alone, in the hour before Elias came in from the barn. $40 a month. A house. Denver was a real city. Newspapers, libraries, other people with whom you could have actual conversations about ideas. The kind of place where a woman on her own could build a life that had shape and substance to it, where the work was steady and the pay was real and nobody's opinion of you was formed before you opened your mouth because you'd arrived on their porch in a worn coat with a letter from the wrong Voss brother. She folded the letter and put it in her coat pocket. She told Elias that evening after supper. She handed him the letter across the table without explanation. He read it. His face did the controlled thing. He handed it back. $40 a month, he said. Yes. House on the property. Yes. He was quiet for a moment. Denver. Yes. He looked at the table. He looked at the letter in her hand. He looked at the window, at the dark January outside. What are you going to do? He said. I don't know yet, she said. He nodded. The nod that didn't give anything away. It's a good offer, he said. He said it the way you say something true that you would prefer not to have to say. You'd be... He stopped. You deserve a good offer. I've had worse things than this winter, Clara said. I know you have, he said. That's not... He stopped again. Something was working in his jaw, the way things work when a man is deciding whether what he wants to say is something he has the right to say. That's not the same as whether you want something better. She looked at him. What would you tell me, she said, if you were going to tell me what you actually thought? He looked at her directly for a moment. Then he looked at his hands on the table. I'd tell you that Nora cried in her room last night, he said. Thomas found her. She thought we were asleep. A pause. He came and told me about it. He doesn't usually come to me with things like that. Clara was quiet. I'd tell you that the work you've done here, the accounts, the Creel situation, the Mosers, that's real. That matters to people. He paused. I'd tell you that the Valley School Fund situation probably has Creel's name in it somewhere, and that without someone who can read accounts the way you can, it's going to stay buried. Elias, she said. I'd tell you, he said, still looking at his hands, that I don't know how to ask you to stay. I know how to ask someone to work. I don't know how to ask... He stopped. I'm not good at this. I know you're not, she said, not unkindly, just accurately. I don't want to ask you to stay because we need you, he said. Because that's not the right reason. That's the same as my brother writing you a letter and not telling you the whole truth about what he was offering. She looked at him. The right reason, he said, is that I want you to stay. Not because the accounts need doing, not because Nora needs someone, because... He looked up finally, and the gray eyes had that quality she'd stopped calling opaque, because she understood now that it wasn't opacity, it was depth. The kind of eyes that take a long time to read because they're worth reading. Because since you got here, the house is different, I'm different, and I don't think that's Nora's doing or the accounts or the weather. The kitchen was very quiet. The stove ticked once. "That's a harder thing to say than anything you've said to me," Clara said. "Yes," he said. "It is." She folded the letter along its lines and looked at it in her hands. She thought about Denver, the library, the newspaper, the $40 a month, the house on the property. She thought about what she'd wanted when she'd stepped off the stage in Oren and walked through the door of the wrong Voss brothers' house. She thought about what she'd thought she wanted, which were the same thing and not the same thing at all. "I'm not going to answer you tonight," she said. He looked at her. "Not because I don't know what I want," she said. "Because I want to know that I'm sure. And I'm not sure yet." She paused. "That's not about you. That's about me needing to make the decision the right way, which means taking the time I need to make it." "Okay," he said. He said it without resentment, without pressure, the way you say okay when you mean it. She got up and put her coffee cup in the basin and picked up the lamp. "Thank you," she said, "for saying what you said." "I should have said it better," he said. "You said it honestly," she said. "That's better than better." She went upstairs. She lay in the narrow bed in the sewing room and looked at the ceiling and listened to the house settle. And she thought about the letter in her coat pocket and the man sitting at the kitchen table below her. And she thought about the difference between the life you make for yourself when you have no other options and the life you make for yourself when you do. That was the difference that mattered, not the choosing, but the having of the choice. She had not had a real choice since she was 12 years old. She lay in the dark with that for a long time. Well, 3 days later, Bill Henderson sent word that the territorial court had accepted the amended filing and had requested a formal response from Aldous Creel within 30 days. The court's language, according to Henderson, was notably direct. There was a phrase about the establishment of clear title that Henderson underlined twice in his accompanying note and which Clara recognized as significant, because courts don't use words like clear title unless they're already leaning toward something. She read Henderson's note at the kitchen table with Elias standing at the window and read him the relevant sections without editorializing, because the document said what it said and didn't need her help. When she finished, Elias was quiet for a moment. Then, 30 days. "Creel will respond within 2 weeks," Clara said. "He won't want to give the impression he needs the full time." She paused. "But he'll also want to see if Edmund responds first." "And Edmund?" "Edmund got his copy of the court notice 2 days before Henderson's. He's had time to find a lawyer in Denver." She folded the note carefully. "Which means Edmund is right now sitting in Denver reading a document that has 3 years of his choices laid out in sequential order and deciding whether to fight it." "Will he fight it?" Elias asked. Clara thought about what she knew of men like Edmund, men who are smooth rather than strong, who rely on the gap between what people know and what people can prove. That gap had just closed significantly. "He might try," she said, "but he won't want to be in a courtroom answering questions about those accounts." She paused. "If Henderson gets a settlement offer from Edmund within the next 3 weeks, you'll know I'm right." Elias turned from the window. "And if he doesn't?" "Then we go to court and I testify about the accounts," Clara said, "which I am prepared to do." Elias looked at her. "You'd do that?" "I've already done most of it in writing," she said. "Saying it in person isn't much different." He was quiet for a moment. "What does testifying in Cheyenne require?" 2 or 3 days, probably. A trip there and back." She paused. "It's after the pass opens." He heard what was under that. She saw him hear it. "That doesn't change the decision," he said carefully. "My asking you to stay isn't connected to the court situation." "I know," she said. "I want to be clear about that." "I know," she said again. "Elias, I know." He accepted this. That afternoon, Nora came home from an afternoon at the Okafor place, where she'd been helping patients with a school project, and she came into the kitchen and sat down at the table and looked at Clara with those dark eyes that saw more than they let on, and she said, "Patience's father says you're the one who told Pa about the land corridor." "Your father was the one who went to talk to Mr. Okafor," Clara said. "But you told him to," Nora said. "I suggested it," Clara said. Nora was quiet for a moment. She picked up a piece of bread from the plate on the table and ate it thoughtfully. Patience says her father says without that conversation they might have sold the east section to Creel before Christmas, and then all the other ranches in the corridor would have been next. Probably, Clara said. So you helped the whole valley, Nora said. Not as flattery, as accounting. Your father helped the whole valley, Clara said. I read some numbers. Nora looked at her with the expression she used when adults said things she found technically true and practically inaccurate. You know what I mean, she said. I do, Clara said. Eat your bread. Nora ate her bread. She ate it looking at Clara the whole time, with the steady, assessing look she had that was so like her father's and so entirely her own. Are you going to Denver? She asked. Clara looked at her. Who told you about Denver? Nobody told me, Nora said. But you had a letter last week, and after that Pa was different, and you were different, and I'm not stupid. You are very much not stupid, Clara said. So are you? Clara was quiet for a moment. I haven't decided yet, she said. Nora nodded. She finished her bread. She got up and put her coat on the peg by the door with the particular care of a 9-year-old performing normalcy. I'm not going to tell you not to go, she said to the coat hooks. Ma always said that you can't want things for people. You can only want things for yourself and let other people make their own choices. Clara looked at this child's back, the careful, controlled set of small shoulders. Your mother was right, Clara said. I know, Nora said. She was right about most things. A pause, still facing the wall. I just thought you should know that if you decide to stay, it wouldn't be a problem. She stopped. For me, it wouldn't be a problem for me. She turned around. Her eyes were completely dry and her chin was level, and she looked exactly like her father when he was working very hard at level. I'm going to go practice my reading, she said, and left the kitchen. Clara sat at the table in the empty kitchen and listened to Nora's footsteps go up the stairs. The Denver letter was in her coat pocket. She reached in and felt the edge of it, the folded paper, the thing that represented a real life in a real city with real money and a house on a property and a future that was clean and clear and chosen. She did not take it out. She just let her hand rest on it for a moment, feeling the shape of it. Then she took her hand out of her pocket and picked up her pen and went back to the school fund records that Frances Calloway had sent over, which had a gap of approximately 2 years that had Gideon Hatch's name written around it in the particular invisible ink of missing documentation, and she got back to work. The decision would come when it came. Until then, there was still the work, and the work was real, and that was enough for now. Edmund's settlement offer arrived on a Thursday, 16 days after the court notice had gone out, exactly as Clara had predicted, and not in the way anyone had expected. It came not through a lawyer, not through Henderson, but in a letter addressed directly to Elias, written in Edmund's too careful handwriting, 3 pages long and circling the essential admission the way a man circles something hot, getting closer with each pass, never quite touching it directly. He was sorry for the confusion. He acknowledged that the property transfer had contained certain irregularities. He proposed to cover the Creel debt in full, $420, and to return a sum equivalent to the documented income discrepancy from the ranch accounts, which he referred to as funds that had been improperly managed during his tenure. Improperly managed. 3 years of deliberate skimming, dressed in those 2 words like a man putting a good coat over dirty clothes. Elias read the letter at the kitchen table. He read it the way he'd read all of Edmund's correspondence, once fast, once slow, then a long stillness. He's not admitting fraud, Elias said. No, Clara said. He's admitting enough to make the fraud stop being prosecutable, while not admitting enough to put it on paper. Can he do that? His lawyer told him to, Clara said. It's the correct move. Henderson will tell you the same. She paused. The question is whether you accept it. Elias put the letter flat on the table. He looked at it. The amount he's offering him, it covers the Creel debt and the missing income? If the figures he's citing match what I documented, yes. She leaned over to look at the numbers in the letter. They match. Then Creel loses the lien. Creel loses the legal basis for the lien, Clara said. Once Edmund pays the debt, Creel's instrument is retired. Your deed is clean. Elias was quiet. Outside, February was doing what February did, pressing down, gray and indifferent. The thaw was still 6 weeks away, maybe more. What would you do? He said. She'd been waiting for that question and had decided when it came to answer it honestly rather than professionally. I'd accept it, she said, not because it's just. It isn't just. What Edmund did has a proper name and he's avoiding that name and he knows you know it. She paused. But fighting for the name costs more than you have right now. You need the ranch clear, you need the money. Taking this doesn't mean you're wrong about what he did. It means you're choosing the ranch over the satisfaction of being right. Elias looked at the letter for another long moment. Then he picked it up and folded it. Write to Henderson, he said. Tell him we accept, conditional on full payment within 30 days. I'll write it this afternoon, Claire said. He got up and put his coat on. He paused at the door. Improperly managed, he said, to the door, to no one in particular. I know, Claire said. He went out. She picked up her pen. Jim sat. Henderson added the 30-day payment condition and the requirement that Creel's lien be formally discharged in the same instrument. Both conditions Edmund's lawyer tried to soften, and Henderson declined to soften, because Henderson had read Claire's accounting summary and had formed a clear view of Edmund Voss that made him disinclined to give ground on procedural matters. Edmund agreed within a week. The payment arrived at Henderson's office in Orrin on a Friday afternoon at the end of February, 3 weeks before the earliest reasonable estimate of the pass opening. Henderson sent word to Blackthorne the same day, carried by his assistant on the fastest horse in Orrin. Elias was in the barn when the message came. Thomas took it out to him. Clara was at the kitchen table with the school fund records when she heard Elias come in, heard something in his footstep, a weight that was gone from it, and she looked up. He held out Henderson's note. She read it. She put it on the table. She looked at her hands. It's done, he said. Yes, she said. He sat down across from her, and they sat there for a moment in the particular quiet of two people who have been carrying something and have just been told they can put it down. It is not the same as happiness, not immediately. It's more like the body taking a moment to remember what it's like not to be braced. The school fund, Clara said. She reached for the records. I found Hatch's signature on the withdrawal entries. 6 withdrawals over 18 months, each under $15, each recorded against supply costs that don't match any supplier invoice I can find. She put the relevant pages in front of him. Francis Calloway needs to see this. Elias looked at the pages. He looked at her. You're finishing it, he said. It needs finishing, she said. Clara. She looked up. The school fund can wait 30 minutes, he said. She put down her pen. He had the expression she'd come to know as the one that cost him, the one that required him to move against his natural direction, which was inward, and say something outward instead. I know you haven't answered the Denver letter, he said. No, she said. It's been 3 weeks. I know how long it's been. He put his hands flat on the table, the position of a man organizing his thoughts through his palms. I'm not going to ask you again, he said. I said what I said, and I meant it. And I'm not going to keep saying it because that starts to feel like pressure, and it isn't. It's not meant to be. I know it isn't, she said. But I want you to know. He stopped, started again. Whatever you decide, I want it to be a real decision, not a decision made because the pass isn't open yet, not a decision made because we need the school fund looked at, or because Nora. He stopped again on Nora's name. Elias, she said. He looked at her. I wrote to Mrs. Graw 2 weeks ago, she said. He was very still. I told her I was grateful for the offer, Clara said. I told her I had accepted a position in the Powder River country that I intended to make permanent. She paused. I didn't tell her the position wasn't formal yet because I wasn't sure how to describe it. The kitchen was absolutely quiet. 2 weeks ago, he said. 17 days ago, she said. I counted. He looked at her for a long moment. You decided and didn't tell me. I needed to be sure I decided for the right reason, she said. Not because of the court case. Not because the pass was closed. Not because Nora looked at me the way she looks at me. She held his gaze. I needed to know I was choosing this, not falling into it because everything else was difficult. And, he said. And I'm choosing it, she said. I'm choosing the valley and the work and the... She paused, because the next word was one she hadn't said yet, and it had weight to it. And the family, whatever shape that takes. She looked at him directly. I'm not Ruth. I'm not a replacement for anything. I'm just... You're Clara, he said. That's all I'm asking for. She looked at the table. She looked at her hands on the accounting papers, ink stained at the index finger the way they always were when she'd been working. She thought about what it meant to choose a place, not to end up in one, not to accept one because the alternatives were worse, but to look at it clearly, knowing its debts and its difficulties, and its cold and its complicated history, and say, this one, this is the one I'm building toward. She had not known, when she arrived at Blackthorn in December with a worn coat and a letter from the wrong brother, that she was arriving anywhere in particular. She'd been in transit for so long that arriving had stopped feeling like a real destination and started feeling like just the next temporary pause. She knew better now. You should probably talk to Nora and Thomas, she said. I was going to talk to them tonight, he said. Talk to them together, she said. Don't tell Nora first and then Thomas separately. They're a unit. They've been a unit since Ruth died. You treat them like a unit, they'll feel like they're part of the decision. He looked at her. You've thought about this. I've had 17 days, she said. He almost smiled. Almost. The corners of his eyes did the thing they did when something in him found something worth finding. He reached across the table and put his hand over hers. Not a long gesture, just a moment of it, and then he took his hand back. I'll talk to them tonight, he said. Pause. He talked to them after supper, in the sitting room, which was a room the family had been underusing since Ruth's death in the way that grief underuses rooms, avoiding them without quite meaning to. Elias lit the lamp in there and asked the children to come sit with him, and Clara stayed in the kitchen and washed the dishes and listened to the murmur of voices without listening to the words, because it was not her conversation, and she trusted him to have it. Nora came into the kitchen 20 minutes later. She stood in the doorway. Her face was the face of a child who has received news she expected and is now dealing with the gap between expecting something and having it arrive as a real thing. Pa told us, she said. I know, Clara said. Nora came all the way into the kitchen. She sat down at the table, her chair, the one she'd sat in every morning for 5 weeks, and put her hands in her lap. He said you're not going to Denver, she said. I'm not going to Denver, Clara said. He said you decided that yourself. Before all the other stuff, the court and everything. 17 days ago, Clara said. Nora looked at her hands. Why didn't you tell us? Because I needed to be sure, Clara said. She sat down across from Nora. Have you ever been almost sure about something, but not completely sure, and you knew if you said it out loud before you were completely sure, the saying of it would push you into being sure before you were actually ready? Nora thought about this with the seriousness it deserved. Like when I almost told Thomas about the sheets in the sewing room, she said, before you came. Exactly like that, Clara said. Nora looked up. He would have told Pa, and then Pa would have put the fence hardware back. Timing matters, Clara said. Nora was quiet for a moment. Then, are you going to sleep in the sewing room forever? Clara looked at her. I don't know what the arrangements will look like, she said. That's for your father and me to work out. It won't happen overnight, and it won't happen in a way that doesn't make sense for everyone. I'm not asking because I'm worried about it, Nora said quickly. I was just wondering about the logistics. The logistics, Clara repeated. Thomas says I think about logistics too much, Nora said. He says I should let things develop naturally. She paused. But I'm 9. I can't help it. Clara looked at this child. This small, clear-eyed, entirely original child who had put clean sheets in the sewing room just in case and had never once pretended she didn't know exactly what she was doing. Your mother would be proud of you, Clara said. She said it carefully because it was the kind of thing that can go wrong in the saying, and she wanted it to go right. Nora was quiet. Her hands were still in her lap. Did you know her? She asked. Then immediately, that's a stupid question. You didn't know her. I know her through you, Clara said, and Thomas. And your father. She paused. And through the things I've heard about her, the things she said, she sounds like someone who is worth knowing. She was, Nora said, very simply. Then she would have liked you. Clara didn't say anything for a moment. What makes you say that? She liked people who didn't make a fuss about hard things, Nora said. She always said that's how you find out who someone actually is. When things are difficult and they don't make a production of it. She looked up at Clara. You don't make a production of things. Sometimes I want to, Clara said honestly. That's different, Nora said. Wanting to and not doing it. That's the whole thing, isn't it? Clara looked at the 9-year-old across the kitchen table. Yes, she said. That's mostly the whole thing. Thomas said less, as Thomas tended to. He came into the kitchen after Nora had gone to bed and stood by the counter with his arms crossed, his father's posture, his mother's eyes, and said, You're staying. I'm staying, Clara confirmed. He nodded. He was quiet for a moment. The school fund, he said. You figured out it was Hatch? The signatures match, she said. Francis Calloway is going to take it to the school board. Hatch is in Nevada now, Thomas said. I heard Mr. Henderson say so. Nevada is still territorial jurisdiction, Clara said. People who take money they shouldn't have taken don't get to keep it just because they moved. Thomas considered this. Is that how you think about Edmund? Clara looked at him. He was not asking to be difficult. He was asking because he was a 14-year-old who was trying to understand how the world worked and had recently received a significant data point about the gap between what people owe and what they actually pay. Edmund paid what Henderson asked for, she said. He didn't pay for what he actually did. Those are different things. She paused. Sometimes the most you can get is the first one. It doesn't mean the second one didn't happen. Thomas absorbed this. He's not going to try to get more from Edmund? No, she said. The ranch is clear. That's what your father needed. But Edmund will carry what he did, Clara said. That's not nothing. People who do what Edmund did, they know what they did. They live with knowing it. She paused. That's not justice exactly, but it's not nothing. Thomas looked at her for a moment. You're not angry about it? I'm a little angry about it, she said honestly. But anger that doesn't serve a purpose just eats you. She looked at the account books stacked on the side table. I'd rather finish the school fund and make sure the Valley doesn't have to deal with another Hatch situation for the next 10 years. Thomas looked at the books too. Then he uncrossed his arms and picked up the nearest one and put it on the table. Show me how you found it, he said. The signature matching. She looked at him. If I'm going to run this ranch someday, he said, with the careful casualness of someone who has been thinking about something for a while, I should know how accounts work. Sit down, Clara said. He sat down. She showed him. Spring came the way it always comes to that country. Not in a single arrival, but in arguments. A warm week in late February, then a bitter reversal. Then a week of mud that froze overnight and thawed by noon. Then finally, in the second week of March, a sustained softening that the land accepted like a long exhalation. The pass opened on March 18th. Clara knew the date because Thomas told her at breakfast with the specific manner of someone passing along information that is factual and also significant and is leaving the significance entirely to the listener. She thanked him for telling her. She did not pack her bag. That afternoon, Elias asked her to come look at something. This was not unusual. He'd been asking her opinion on ranch matters with increasing regularity since January, in the practical way of a man who has discovered that thinking out loud to someone who thinks back is useful. She put on her coat and followed him around the south side of the main house to a door she'd noticed but assumed was a storage entrance. He opened it. It was a room she hadn't seen before, not large, with a window that faced east toward the far tree line and the creek beyond it. Someone had recently cleaned it. The floor had been swept, the single shelf dusted. There was a small table under the window, the right height for working. Someone had put a lamp on it. She stood in the doorway and looked. It used to be a sitting room, Elias said behind her. Ruth used it in summer, good light in the morning. He paused. I had it closed for a while. I opened it up last week. Clara stepped inside. She put her hand on the table. The wood was solid, old, smoothed by years of use. It needs a better lamp, she said. I ordered one from the Orange Dry Goods, he said. It comes in Thursday. She turned around. He was standing in the doorway the way he stood when he wasn't sure of his reception, slightly more still than usual, hands at his sides. He held out a key. It was a small key, iron, worn smooth from years on a ring. "The door locks from inside," he said. "I had Henderson's assistant. He does metalwork. I had him make a second key." He paused. "This one's yours." She looked at the key in his hand. She looked at him. "Yours," he said again carefully. "Not borrowed. Not conditional. The room is yours as long as you want it to be." She took the key. It was lighter than she expected. Small things that mean large things always are. "Elias," she said. "You don't have to say anything," he said. "I know I don't," she said. "I want to say it anyway." She looked at him directly, the way she had from the first day on the porch when she'd refused to look away. "I am not going to be easy to live with all the time. I have opinions about things, and I say them. I don't know how to stop working when I should stop working. I get particular about numbers, and I don't always explain myself when I should." "I know," he said. There was something in it, not amusement, not quite, but something that recognized itself in what she was saying. "And I'm not Ruth," she said. "I know that too," he said. "I told you. I know what you want," she said. "I just want you to know that I know what I'm not, as well as what I am. So there are no gaps between what you expect and what you get." She paused. "I've been on the wrong end of gaps like that. I don't intend to create them." He looked at her. That look, the gray eyes that took a long time because they were worth taking the time for. "What are you?" he said, not rhetorically, actually asking. She thought about it. She thought about it the way she thought about a number she needed to be sure of before she wrote it down. "I'm someone who can make a home out of a difficult situation," she said. "I'm someone who reads accounts better than most people and isn't afraid of what the numbers say. I'm someone who will tell Nora the truth and make Thomas learn things he doesn't know he needs yet." She paused. "And I'm someone who walked into a blizzard to find you, which I think tells you something about how I make decisions when it matters." He was quiet for a moment. "It tells me a lot," he said. He crossed the room. He took her hand, not dramatically, not as a gesture, just took her hand the way you take hold of something real. And she let him. And they stood in the east-facing room with the morning light that would come through the window in a few hours, and the key was in her other hand, and outside the creek was running for the first time since December. She thought about the woman who had stepped off a stagecoach in a worn coat with a letter addressed to the wrong man, and how that woman had not known, standing in the snow on that porch, what she was arriving at. How she'd thought she was arriving at a mistake. She had been. And the mistake had turned out to be the start of something. That is the thing about arriving somewhere unexpected. You don't get to choose the conditions of the beginning. You only get to choose what you do next, and then what you do after that. And the choosing accumulates day by day until one day you look up and realize that what you've built is real, and it's yours, and you built it out of the materials that were actually available rather than the ones you'd imagined, and somehow that makes it more solid, not less. Clara Whitmore had spent most of her life being defined by the gaps, the things she lacked, the places she didn't belong, the arrangements that fell through, the doors that opened and turned out to be the wrong rooms. She had learned, over years of that, to be careful with wanting, to hold the wanting loosely so it couldn't hurt you when the floor gave way. She was learning a different way now, not to want less, but to stand still long enough to let the wanting arrive at something real. Boom. Spring opened the valley the way it always did, slowly and then all at once. The creek came up, the mud roads turned passable. The cattle that had been tight in the winter pastures began to spread back across the east section. The east section with its clear title, its clean deed, its lien discharged in full by a man sitting in a Denver hotel who had gotten exactly what he'd bargained for and considerably less than he deserved. Francis Calloway took the school fund evidence to the board in the second week of March. The board authorized Henderson to pursue recovery from Gideon Hatch in Nevada, and Hatch, through his own lawyer, 3 weeks later, returned the money without litigation, which was the tell that he'd always known exactly what he'd done and had been waiting for the day someone figured it out. The school fund was restored. A new treasurer was appointed. Clara was asked to design the accounting system going forward, which she agreed to do. Victor Okafor, at the Spring Ranchers meeting in Orin, stood up and said, in front of 23 people, that the valley had avoided a significant land consolidation by Aldous Creel because someone had thought to share information that Creel had been counting on nobody sharing. He did not name Clara. He named Elias, which was correct as far as it went, and Elias said afterward that it felt strange to be thanked for something that had mostly been Clara's thinking. And Clara said that the valley knowing and the valley knowing who to credit were two different things, and the first one was what mattered. Creel retreated. Not permanently. Men like Creel don't retreat permanently. They rotate to the next opportunity. But from the Powder River corridor specifically, which meant the ranches on either side of what would have been his land bridge, continued to run cattle and make decisions for themselves and sell to whom they chose. That was not nothing. In the particular economy of the frontier, that was a great deal. Elias's ankle healed by February. Imperfectly. It would ache in cold weather for years after, which he mentioned once and never mentioned again. Thomas grew 2 inches before spring and finally got new boots, which Clara had properly fitted at the Orin dry goods store by the simple method of bringing Thomas with her and making him stand still while they measured. Nora learned to do her own accounts, starting with the egg money from the 6 hens, which she managed with a seriousness that Clara recognized as her own and felt something about that she didn't try to name. The east-facing room became Clara's room, her workroom, her thinking room. The lamp that came in Thursday from Orin's dry goods was better than the old one, as Elias had promised. In the mornings, the light came in at a low angle that was good for reading ledgers, and she used it that way, and it was hers, and she did not stop feeling the weight of that. Not because it was heavy, but because things that matter should have weight to them. You should feel them. The things you don't feel are the things you lose without noticing. She was not lost. She was not temporary. She was not the woman who arrived on the wrong porch with the wrong letter and the worn coat. Or rather, she was all of those things. And she was also the woman who had stayed, and the staying had changed the shape of what those earlier things meant. That is what belonging does, when you build it honestly instead of waiting for someone to hand it to you. It doesn't erase where you came from. It just gives those old things somewhere to land. On a Saturday in late March, with the snow finally off the south fields and the first real warmth coming down from a sky that had decided to be blue again, Elias asked Clara to come outside for a minute. She put on her coat and came out and found him standing at the edge of the yard, looking at the east section, the long, good, clear tidal grassland running toward the tree line. He didn't say anything for a moment, just looked at it. "I've been thinking about putting a third fence line in," he said, "along the creek boundary. It would let us run a separate herd on the east side in summer." "That's a good idea," she said. "Thomas wants to help design it," he said. "He's been drawing plans." "He has," Clara said. "He showed me last week. The spacing is right." Elias looked at her sidelong. "You looked at his plans." "He asked me to," she said. "He wanted to know if the measurements worked." "Did they?" "Mostly," she said. "He'd miscalculated the post spacing at the creek bend. I showed him where." Elias looked back at the field. He was quiet for a moment. "Thank you," he said. "For checking his math." He paused. "For being here when I wasn't sure I deserved to have someone here." He said it simply, the way he said things when he'd decided to say them. "I'm not good at—" "I know you're not," she said. "I was going to finish that sentence," he said. "I know how it finishes," she said.